Everything started when almighty dragons descended upon Earth with their enormous armies, bringing destruction the moment they appeared. Out of nowhere, certain individuals awakened mysterious powers. Those who gained these gifts became known as Psychers. They were the ones who stood bravely on the front lines against the invading dragon hordes. Through their sacrifice and struggle, humanity managed to win that devastating war. But a prophecy foretold that this peace would not endure, for the dragons would inevitably return, even stronger than before, to safeguard humanity's survival. An organization called ARC was established. ARC's mission was straightforward: to seek out children born with psychic potential and train them for the coming battle. With only 3 years left before the dragons reappear, ARC must guide these youths and awaken the hidden strength within them. Among the staff of ARC is John Red, a man who once fought those very dragons, yet lived through the nightmare of that war with his own eyes. The gruesome memories of that bloody battlefield still linger and torment him. Now, however, he serves as an instructor at ARC. His duty is to shape and lead the new generation of Psychers. And here enters our small yet significant protagonist. His name is Han Lee, supposedly the leader of a scrappy gang of war orphans. Though still young, officials brand him as a street criminal, even though what he truly does is care for and protect fellow orphans. Yet one official viewed him differently. He believed Han Lee wasn't just another troubled kid, he was a diamond in the rough. So a deal was struck. If Han Lee agreed to join ARC and work on awakening his powers, that official promised to look after the orphans. And with that, Han Lee eventually set foot inside ARC. But the first thing he encountered wasn't training or a classroom. Instead, he stumbled upon a cocky kid picking on someone weaker, while the rest of the crowd simply watched. Even though he himself barely had any psychic power to speak of, still, Han Lee stepped in, confronting the bully with the intent to teach him a hard-earned lesson. But before their fight could escalate, John Red himself appeared on the scene, the same man mentioned earlier. With an intimidating glare, he ordered the children to stand down. Both boys straightened up immediately as the veteran demanded their names. Without hesitation, they stated who they were. John then turned to Simon, asking whether he had developed any distinct abilities, especially since the boy had just been brawling. Simon, slightly tense, replied that his ability was simply telekinesis, nothing more. Meanwhile, Han Lee seemed completely lost, not even knowing what these so-called special traits meant. Suddenly, without any warning, John drove a punch straight into Simon. He called him out for showing off the one ability he had, even though in John's eyes he was nothing more than a weakling. The strike was so fierce that Simon collapsed, shaking in pain. Han Lee stood frozen, shock and confusion written all over his face. Then John shifted his gaze toward Han Lee, remarking that he respected the boy's decision to step forward and help. Those words gave Han Lee a brief moment of relief, but John slammed his fist into Han Lee's stomach, dropping him to the ground as well, declaring that since Han Lee didn't even match Simon's ability, he was even worse. As both boys lay on the floor, the man announced that in 3 weeks they would all enter as first-year trainees. Until then, if they failed to perform telekinesis, they would be expelled. Han Lee gritted his teeth, struggling to rise. John introduced himself, warning them that he was the instructor who would forge them into psychic knights capable of facing the dragons. And with that, training began. His first order was for them to run laps around the center until he said otherwise. Soon enough, the running commenced. Some students stumbled, others gasped for breath. All the while, John barked at them relentlessly not to quit, telling them to go home if they dared stop. Anyone who halted was immediately expelled on the spot. Han Lee, however, kept running. He was long used to harsh treatment, so physical pain didn't scare him. The real worry was his psychic powers. Glancing toward Simon, who was also running, Han Lee wondered if he could ever manage abilities like that, or if he even had any psychic talent at all. Meanwhile, Kuro was struggling, clearly exhausted. Sweat poured down his face before he collapsed, right in front of John. Seeing this, the instructor sneered and called him another useless punk, daring him to quit and crawl back if he was weak. The boy whined that he couldn't keep running any longer. Before John could berate him, Han Lee swung his arm over Kuro's shoulder, helping him back to his feet. He reminded John that Kuro never said he was giving up. As the two continued running together, John observed them quietly, saying nothing. Time passed until the instructor finally called for a stop. The exhausted trainees collapsed, gasping for breath. Out of 73, only 40 remained. John told them to prepare for real training the next day, warning that mornings would begin with runs just like this. The boys were stunned, jaws dropping, but none dared voice a complaint. The next morning marked the true start of training at ARC. At 5 a.m., the day began with another grueling run. By 8, they were allowed breakfast, and at 9, morning classes. In the auditorium, instructors told them their powers could stem from their head, heart, or abdomen, emphasizing visualization like martial arts. Hearing this, Han Lee chose to focus on his heart. By noon, it was lunchtime. In the cafeteria, after grabbing his meal, he glanced around and saw everyone chatting. That's when he noticed Kuro sitting alone, so he went over to join him. Kuro became Han Lee's very first friend, not just at ARC, but ever. As they were about to eat, Simon walked by, casting a sharp, hostile glare their way. Kuro told Han Lee that Simon had been part of a special gifted program in England. Han Li scoffed, realizing that's where Simon's arrogance came from. Still, it frustrated him. Right now, Simon was ahead, and with only 3 weeks to master telekinesis, the pressure was suffocating. Han Li also learned that Kuro could already use telekinesis. It hit him that worrying about Kuro had been unnecessary, since his friend was far more talented than he thought. From then, their routine was filled with evening lessons, combat drills, and endless running. After showering, they had dinner, did maintenance tasks, then roll call, before lights out at 10 p.m. Yet lying in bed, Han Li couldn't sleep. He reflected on how he now had 3 meals a day, a hot shower, and a soft bed. This life was 1,000 times better than what he once knew. But deep inside, a thought of returning home crept in. The moment it surfaced, he tried to push it away, reminding himself that he needed to stay strong. 2 weeks went by, and many students had already mastered telekinesis. But no matter how much effort Han Li poured in, he couldn't achieve it. At this point, he began to doubt himself, wondering if he simply lacked what it took. Though he asked his friend for advice, but got nothing useful, leaving him with only one option. Mustering his courage, Han Li approached Simon, who was sitting with his clique. The arrogant boy smirked, eager to know why Han Li had shown up, though he already had an idea. Han Li wasn't in the mood for games, bluntly telling Simon to stop fooling around and just explain how to do it. His rival mocked him instead, saying his stiff neck matched the rude manners of his homeland. Han Li knew pride wouldn't get him anywhere, so he knelt down before Simon. Seeing this, Bully realized how desperate Han Li was to obtain the skill. Feeling a strange pang, Simon told him to get back up. Still, he warned Han Li not to complain later about the method, since he was the one begging for it. Then Simon asked a friend to hand him a pencil. Without warning, Simon grabbed Han Li by the shoulder and drove the pencil straight into his chest. Panic flooded Han Li's face as he struggled to comprehend what had just happened. Meanwhile, at his office window, the instructor stood silently, watching a helicopter circling the building. A cigarette dangled from his fingers, its smoke curling into the air. He stared at the aircraft, struck by how quickly the day had slipped away. At that moment, Octo walked in, his face brightening at the sight of John. The warmth faded instantly as the stench of smoke filled the air. Wrinkling his nose, Octo reminded him this was a no-smoking zone. John ignored it, took another drag, and instead demanded the purpose of his visit. Octo sat down slowly, briefly considering whether they might walk out together later. Steering the topic, he asked about the new recruits. John's reply was blunt. He called them useless. Yet he admitted that maybe 1 or 2 had potential. Octo was stunned. Only 1 or 2, he repeated, disbelief clear in his tone. John explained further. Among them was Simon, arrogant but skilled. In fact, he was already ahead of most first years. Octo had already heard about Simon's background from Britain's Royal Cycle Training Center and was eager to see him in action. Then the instructor shifted the subject, speaking about our protagonist. He described Han Li as loyal and full of spirit, claiming he stood out as the best among all the new recruits. In John's mind, Han Li embodied the qualities of an ideal soldier. Yet Ark wasn't searching for regular fighters. They were after extraordinary beings, those who could wield psychic abilities. Without that, Han Li had no real place here. At that moment, Octo grinned mischievously. He challenged John to guess the nickname the trainees had given him. Without hesitation, John guessed it must be something like, son of a bitch. Octo froze, caught off guard because John's guess turned out to be absolutely correct. Later, back at the training ground, the recruits lined up neatly while John reminded them that only those prepared to become psychers would advance into the first year. He explained that the most common psychic ability was external manifestation, which revealed itself through a glow in the eyes. John emphasized that whether or not they could use telekinesis didn't matter, but at the very least they had to demonstrate external manifestation if they wanted to stay. Those able to do so were told to move toward the technician, Octo, for testing. Those who couldn't would have to step to the right where agents waited to send them home. Han Li scanned the area, still trying to process everything. His eyes widened in shock when he suddenly noticed Kang standing at the edge of the training field. The test began. Those who succeeded rushed eagerly toward Octo, while the rest cried helplessly as they were escorted away by the agents. Han Li froze where he stood, unable to move. Uro shot him a worried look, concern plain on his face. Han Li pressed a hand to his chest. He remembered the moment when Simon had driven a pencil straight into his heart. The memory shook him. He still couldn't believe Simon had gone that far, as if he had truly tried to kill him. Simon, however, brushed it off, telling him not to worry. He hadn't stabbed that deeply, and he had only done it so Han Li could focus, because that wound would serve as his psychic channel. While Han Li was still reeling on the ground, Simon crouched down and told him that channeling psychic power wasn't something you achieved by simply pressing your hand to your chest and concentrating for a few days. It required much more. With that, Simon walked away, leaving Han Li shocked that he already seemed to know Li's core was centered in his heart. From that day forward, Han Li faintly felt psychic energy flowing within him, and slowly, it began to grow stronger. Now, standing once more on the training field, he tried to summon it. He pressed his hand firmly to his chest and clenched his teeth, but John's barked command suddenly cut him off, ordering him to move at once. Han Li was now the only one left behind. Kuro stood with the others, tense and worried for his friend, while Han Li remained rooted in place. John's fury boiled over as he shouted at Han Li for ignoring a soldier's order. Enraged, John advanced, raising his fist to strike. In that split second, Han Li noticed something. A pin was tucked inside his pocket. As John's punch came closer, Han Li snatched the pin and fell back to the ground. Wasting no time, he got to his feet. The other recruits noticed the pin clutched in his hand, and Han Li understood his psychic energy wasn't flowing properly because his channel was too narrow. So, without hesitation, he stabbed himself in the chest. Gasps erupted from everyone around, stunned at his actions. John seized him by the collar instantly, demanding to know if he had some kind of death wish. But then he saw it, the faint psychic glow shining through Han Li's tear-filled eyes. At that sight, John released him. Turning away, John calmed himself, admitting silently that he had never seen a boy with so little talent struggle so fiercely. Yet he turned back to Han Li and offered him congratulations. Meanwhile, Han Li wept from the pain, blood spilling from his chest wound, his face already swollen from John's earlier punch. With his hand pressed tightly over his chest, he finally took a deep, relieved breath. At last, he had reached the starting line. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed Kuro running toward him, panic written across his face. "Are you okay?" Kuro asked urgently. Han Li forced a small smile, brushing it off as just a scratch. Before Kuro could say more, the doctor approached, holding a sleek, bracelet-like communication device. Without a word, he fastened it onto Han Li's wrist. More than just a gadget, it was a mark of acceptance. As it clicked into place, a gentle chime rang out. Han Li's eyes widened as a notification appeared before him. He had officially been registered. His recruitment was complete. Amazement spread across his face as Octo began explaining the bracelet's extra functions. But before he could finish, John's commanding voice cut through the air, announcing that it was time to assign classes. The recruits were told to check their placements and head to their designated rooms. John explained the structure, 4 classes, labeled A through D, determined by ability. Placement was based on their 3 weeks of training so far, though he emphasized that promotions were possible with consistent improvement. With that, John congratulated the 20 who remained, acknowledging that they all thought of him as a son of a bitch, but insisting that was only a misconception. Octo's eyes went wide when John leaned in and clarified that he wasn't just any son of a bitch, but the worst of them all. Ultimately, only Simon was assigned to Class A. Kuro and 3 others were placed in Class B. 5 of the recruits landed in Class C. An Li, along with 14 others, was assigned to Class D. Fired up, he was determined to improve quickly and rise to a higher class. But panic spread among the students of Classes C and D when they were ordered to follow instructor Wei Chen. His reputation was even scarier than John's. Yet Wei Chen greeted them with a smile, introducing himself as their weapons instructor. He warned that the road ahead would be tough, but assured them they would face it together. His unexpectedly kind demeanor melted the students' fears. Just then, they were told to move out. Kuro's eyes welled with tears at having to part ways with Han Li. But Han Li gave him a steady look, silently promising they'd catch up soon. Pushing forward, Wei Chen led the C and D students to the gym. Soon after, the boys were left in awe, watching Wei Chen demonstrate his incredible mastery of the spear. His strikes were precise, deliberate, and lightning fast. He explained that the boys might wonder why they needed to learn sword or spear techniques when fighting monsters. The answer lay in the psychic weapons they would wield. These weapons couldn't store psychic energy on their own, but they could both hold and transmit it when channeled properly. That was why weapons forged from dragon parts were deadly against dragons. Curious, Han Li asked how battles were fought before such weapons even existed. Wei narrowed his eyes. Hi! He explained that, in the beginning, fights were barehanded, and countless psychers lost their lives just to bring down a single dragon. Some had long-range abilities to attack from a distance, but to actually kill a dragon, you had to understand its reach, its movements, and hit its vital points with psychic energy. Those capable of such strikes were called strikers. And so, today, the kids would each choose the weapon best suited for them. Before long, Han Li was holding a spear. Wei noticed it. Han Li explained that he liked the sharp sound it made when Wei had swung it earlier. Wei didn't let it show. Deep down, he was impressed. Choosing a spear wasn't an easy call, and standing up to John earlier had proven Han Li's courage. From this, Wei realized the boy must have endured great hardship back home. But setting aside sympathy, he recognized one thing clearly: Han Li was strong and gifted. With a warm smile, Wei told him how eager he was to train him, promising his full support. 2 weeks later, the training exam arrived. Han Li faced off against Jose. Jose looked exhausted, clearly struggling. With a cocky smirk, Han Li urged him to give up, but Jose wasn't ready to surrender. He launched one last, desperate attack. Han Li blocked it with ease and quickly defeated him. Jose surrendered as Han Li was about to land another strike. It had now been 2 weeks since he officially became a first year, and today he had beaten the class leader himself. After besting everyone in sparring, Jose shook Han Li's hand. Han Li felt grateful, knowing he had learned much from him. Since Jose was moving up to Class C, he suggested Han Li take his place as class leader, but Han Li replied that it wasn't their decision to make. Jose assured him the others would follow his lead, and that none of the students had an issue with it. With that, Han Li thanked Jose and his classmates, feeling encouraged. Maybe taking on this role could help him rise to Class C. But when John heard of the development, he loomed over Han Li and rejected the idea outright. Standing there nervously, Han Li couldn't shake the feeling of déjà vu, as if he had been in this situation before. Meanwhile, senior staff at ARC muttered about John's notorious temper, wondering who had provoked him this time. When they learned it was just a first-year student, they were stunned. Back at the training ground, Han Li stood in a combat stance with his spear, while the other students crowded around watching. Standing before him, the sergeant lit a cigarette, sparking the flame with his psychic fire ability. From the academy building, the senior students shouted encouragements toward the first years, telling Li to give John a real fight. Their voices were loud enough for him to hear, but he didn't even bother to turn around, he just smirked. Meanwhile, poor Li was trembling with nerves, recalling how only a short while ago back in the dorm, he had gone there to ask if everyone truly agreed with him being the class leader, even though he couldn't use telekinesis at all. Then, breaking a mop's rod, John tossed it straight to Li. He admitted hearing that the protagonist was the class topper in weapon sparring, so he told him to fight and prove it, while Li looked at the rod like a spear, remarking on how sharp it seemed. But when the trainer mocked him, asking if he really believed someone like him could cause any damage, the two of them ended up on the training ground. There, John casually removed his jacket. Right after, Li nervously asked John if he intended to fight without using any weapons. The senior confirmed it and laid out the rules. If any part of his body touched the ground, he would lose. Curious about what rules applied to John, the young MC asked, and John simply said all he needed to do was surrender. Hearing that, Li declared that he wouldn't be the one losing today. As the match began, the kids from Class A praised Li's stance, whispering among themselves. Simon barked at them to quiet down and move. Then he watched the fight with his own eyes. On the training ground, Li charged forward, swinging his makeshift spear with all his effort, but every single strike was easily dodged by John. Once John grew tired of only defending, he decided to go on the offensive. He grabbed the boy by the collar, then slammed him onto the ground. Without hesitation, he raised his foot to stomp down on him, but Li managed to roll away just in time. Gasping for breath, Li wondered if this man was actually trying to kill him since he wasn't holding back at all. It was as if John could hear his very thoughts. John made it clear that he killed both dragons and their minions without distinction. So if Li thought he would go easy just because he was weak, he was terribly mistaken. John told him that the fear he was feeling now would be nothing compared to what he'd feel against those beasts. Ainting hard, Li shot back sarcastically, asking if John was planning to fight only with his mouth. Seeing that attitude, John understood this kid could endure more than expected. So once again, he grabbed him and hurled him across the ground, but just as the students started cheering for Li, John suddenly noticed a cut on his own face and wondered when Li had managed to land that hit. Intrigued, the sergeant decided to let Li continue, wanting to see what he was capable of. At that moment, the boy spun his body. Using his weapon, he lunged at John with everything he had. John dodged, noticing that Li was using centrifugal force and acceleration to power his strike. Amused, John realized why Wei was fond of this boy, even admitting he liked him now as well. With that thought, John chose to accept Li's final attack. As the boy leapt high into the air, he charged the spear-like rod and slashed it across John's chest. But then, the trainer seized Li by the throat and began choking him. He threatened that unless Li surrendered, he would die right there. Of course, our protagonist couldn't fall that early. He refused to surrender. John applied even more pressure with his psychic ability, provoking him again to yield. Yet Li declared he'd rather die than give in. The training ground erupted in panic as the boy gritted his teeth, tears streaming down his face. Hearing the uproar, Wei arrived just in time, rushing to John. He pulled Li away from him. The boy had already fainted and demanded if John was trying to kill him, but John brushed it off, saying Li never surrendered, and he himself hadn't lost either. He demanded Wei decide what to do now, but the old instructor, squatting and holding Li, harshly judged John and the ARC's brutal methods. Then John heard all the boys booing him. His anger doubled, and he roared at them to shut up. Grabbing his jacket, he prepared to leave, announcing that since the boy hadn't surrendered, he could be considered the winner. Furthermore, he told Wei to stop babying him, explaining that Li had already overcome his own hardships and proven his worth. The other boys, including bully Simon, and even the crybaby Kuro, watched the scene with worry. As Wei turned to leave without a word, John ordered him to send Li to Class B once he was treated. With that, the big man walked off. Time passed. Sergeant John visited the hospital, discussing with the doctor about putting Li on the advancement list. The doctor was stunned, knowing a jump from Class D to Class B was a huge deal that the higher-ups might not accept. But John argued that Li was even good enough for Class A, only his latent psychic powers were slowing him down. The doctor reminded him that psychic ability was exactly what the higher-ups valued most. John countered that they were mistaken, because what truly mattered in a dragon battle wasn't psychic ability, but the courage to stab those monsters in the heart even while terrified. With that mindset, John believed Lee had the potential to be the best striker ARC had ever seen, and discarding him just because his psychic powers awakened late would be a terrible mistake. It would be pure waste because this boy might save the world one day. The way John praised him left the doctor stunned, since everyone thought John hated him. Yet John clarified it was the exact opposite, leaving the doctor suspecting the trainer was actually a sadist. A week into Lee's hospitalization, the doctor spotted instructor Wei standing outside Lee's room. He already knew Wei often visited Lee, and this time he carried a basket of fruits and snacks. But she noticed him just standing there, not going in, so she asked why. Scratching his head, Wei gestured for her to peek through the window, saying it wasn't the right time to visit. When she looked inside, both saw Lee sitting upright on his bed. He was trying to move a glass ball with telekinesis. Concentrating hard, his eyes glowed blue as sweat trickled down his face. Quietly, the doctor and instructor cheered him on, praying for success. And then, in an instant, the glass ball lifted into the air. Overcome with excitement, both Wei and the doctor clapped. But then they suddenly realized they were colleagues and grew awkward. The doctor urged him to leave while Wei reflected on how impressive Lee truly was. Moments later, Wei stepped into the room. Both he and Lee greeted one another. Wei asked about his condition, and while cutting fruit, he told Lee he would be joining Class B starting tomorrow. He also praised Lee for practicing telekinesis here, saying how proud he felt. While eating, Lee agreed, explaining his psychic grades were very low, which was why he practiced so much. Wei appreciated his reasoning, reminding him that no matter how strong someone was, every psyker should be able to use at least a little telekinesis. After all, most battles took place mid-air, and regaining grip on weapons was vital. At that moment, Wei came up with an idea. He asked the receptionist for permission to take the boy out for a while. At first, the receptionist hesitated, but eventually agreed. Soon after, Wei and Lee arrived at the gym. Confused, Lee asked why they had come here. Wei explained that the chances of his specialty awakening were slim. It was better for him not to dream of ignition or teleportation like others. Using his own ability, Wei asked how Lee planned to fight. Then he answered himself. Lee needed to train his telekinesis to its absolute limit. That telekinesis itself would become his true specialty. Stepping forward, Wei used telekinesis to arrange sticks into a stair-like shape, walking down them as he explained that psychic abilities were like muscles. The more they were exercised, the stronger they became. He elaborated further, saying the lowest grade of psychic ability was nothing more than illusion. In that case, Lee needed to train even harder because his generation carried far more potential than Wei's ever did. Fully motivated, Lee decided to follow Wei's guidance. And so, our boy finally stood in front of Class B. As he entered, his body accidentally bumped into the chest of a guy named Dimitri. At first, the guy looked angry, but then he smiled when he realized it was Han Lee. He was a bit surprised, not expecting Lee to already know his name. Dimitri explained that the entire class already knew about Lee. After that, he introduced himself properly. He was the class leader, and the two shook hands. Dimitri was actually glad about the timing of Lee's arrival, because right now, they were in the middle of weapons sparring. Lee followed Dimitri to the gym, looking around carefully as he entered. He reflected that weapons training had always been his favorite. The daily grind at ARC was exhausting, especially since he constantly feared being expelled for lacking psychic abilities. But sparring with weapons was his escape, the one time he could let out all his stress. Without holding back, Lee gripped his weapon, and in one swift strike he knocked out his opponent. Among those present was Kuro, lying on the ground, terrified, with tears welling up in his eyes because he had just been bullied by the others. Standing tall, Lee demanded if they really found this fun, pointing out that Kuro's strength lay in his psychic abilities. He asked if targeting someone's weakness was entertaining to them. None of them dared respond, still groaning in pain. Lee told them they should be thankful this wasn't psychic sparring. Meanwhile, Dimitri quietly observed the scene. His hands trembled with anticipation, eager to fight. Since Lee turned out to be the kind of fighter he expected, Dimitri couldn't wait to clash with him properly. The moment our MC entered the gym, his eyes fell on the boys tormenting Kuro. They were taking turns bullying him. All Kuro could do was cry for help before collapsing. Through the blur of pain, he suddenly saw his savior fighting on his behalf. In disbelief, Kuro wondered if Lee had really come to help him. Lee now confronted Dimitri, his voice sharp with anger, demanding to know if his cruelty was what Class B considered sparring. Kuro tried to call out to Lee, but Lee was far too angry to calm down. His rage only deepened when one bully sneered that enemies in the field wouldn't hold back just because someone was weak. Dimitri smirked, calling Lee an outsider for interfering. He claimed Lee's actions only made Kuro's situation worse, his words grinding with frustration. Lee clenched his fists, unable to come up with a strong reply. To taunt him further, Dimitri scoffed that knocking out a few weaklings who now lay unconscious across the floor was nothing impressive. Instead, he proposed they show everyone what real sparring looked like. Tightening his grip on his weapon, Lee locked eyes with Dmitri. His expression hardened as he confirmed, through gritted teeth, if this was truly a challenge. Without hesitation, the spar began. Dmitri charged first. He swung from above, but Lee dodged. Dmitri immediately raised his spear again, but Lee thought if he blocked twice in a row, his weapon would break. So instead, he dodged and spun his spear skillfully. He aimed for Dmitri's leg, planning to distract him before knocking him out. He swung and struck Dmitri under the knee. Thinking that was the end of it, Lee quickly aimed his follow-up strike toward Dmitri's face, but Dmitri steadied himself, remaining on his feet, and blocked the attack. In the same motion, he headbutted Lee in the forehead. The impact knocked Lee flat on his back. Dizzy on the ground, Lee muttered that this was supposed to be weapon sparring, not a headbutting contest. Smirking, Dmitri told him he stood no chance anyway and warned him to watch out not just for the spear but his hands as well, since he had been training in Sambo practically since birth. Rising, Lee demanded if Dmitri planned to use Sambo against dragons too. Dmitri shamelessly admitted he would, if given the chance. The boys cheered loudly for their class leader, calling him the baby tiger of Siberia. Smiling, Dmitri told them to stop calling him that. It didn't suit his image. One joked that since he was only 12, he'd always be a baby. Dmitri snapped back, threatening to deal with them later. Watching this, Lee grew uneasy, realizing they were all idiots even when insulting one another. But he could see it was harmless teasing. These boys were clearly close, with Dmitri at their center. On the other hand, his eyes turned toward Kuro, who sat with his head hanging low. Worry for his friend made Lee lose focus. That's when Dmitri suddenly attacked. Lee didn't want to drag this out, but he still dodged and parried quickly. Crouching low, Dmitri lunged forward toward Lee, but Lee planted his spear in the ground, used it as support, and vaulted himself upward. Now above Dmitri, he tried to strike down at his head. Instead, he only managed to graze Dmitri's elbow, and before he could press on, Dmitri cleverly shattered his weapon in half, having aimed for it from the start. In that instant, Dmitri rushed at Lee, slamming him hard into the ground. With Lee pinned, he warned him to surrender unless he wanted his arm broken. The whole class cheered for Dmitri as he twisted Lee's arm and leg into a lock. But Lee didn't care. He dared Dmitri to go ahead and break it if he was man enough. Acting recklessly, Dmitri actually pulled and snapped his arm. Lee fell limp on the ground. Silence filled the gym. Kuro rushed to his side, crying out in worry for his friend. Standing tall, Dmitri praised Lee for not screaming even after his arm was broken, saying he'd give him points for that. He then told the others to take Lee to the infirmary, but as he turned, someone behind him caught his attention. Before Dmitri could react, Lee smashed the back of his head with his broken weapon. He declared that every opponent he had faced so far had been crybabies who whined over broken arms, so Dmitri should get up and finish this fight. But when he noticed Dmitri not moving, Lee hesitated, calling out in confusion. The boy who had been acting tough moments earlier had already lost consciousness. Later, Dmitri was jolted awake by the sharp beeping sound of a monitor. He sat up instantly, disoriented, wondering what had happened. His eyes shifted to the bed next to him, where Lee sat staring at his bracelet. A notification blinked, downloading a video message. Once complete, Lee opened it immediately. On screen appeared Kang, speaking with admiration. He praised Lee, thanking him sincerely, and mentioned that the other kids were doing well. Kang promised to send another video next time, attaching a photo of the children smiling brightly beside him. Tears welled in Lee's eyes as a smile spread across his face. He couldn't hold back his emotions, crying freely as he saw the kids looking healthier, happier, and even fuller. Overwhelmed, Lee glanced at Dmitri, surprised to find him awake and watching. After a pause, he softly asked Dmitri to swipe to the next picture for him. Still dazed, Dmitri began swiping, then suddenly barked, "Why should I do that?" It was a foolish question. Lee reminded him that he broke his arm, so obviously he owed him something. To fire back, Dmitri reminded Lee that he'd struck him in the back of the head, calling it a cheap shot. Lee argued it was Dmitri's own fault for letting his guard down, for getting RC's way. Hearing ARC's way left Dmitri speechless, pursing his lips in irritation. But Lee clarified he'd only been angry that day, and now he held no grudge. Smiling, Dmitri admitted he felt the same, though he looked forward to seeing who would really win next time. Lee's expression dimmed as he remembered Kuro. He regretted fighting on his behalf instead of lending him a hand. Dmitri understood how Lee felt, but reminded him that Kuro might not even survive his second year. Confused, Lee pressed him to explain what he meant. Leaving his hospital bed, Lee followed Dmitri down the hall, puzzled about where they were headed. Dmitri said it was easier to show than explain. They arrived at the emergency ward, where everyone who could still breathe was being treated. Just then, a gravely wounded man was rushed past them on a stretcher. Dmitri looked at Lee, hoping he understood the intensity of the training now. But Lee was still puzzled since all the cadets were their age, yet the man on the stretcher had looked older, more like an instructor. Scratching the back of his head, Dmitri revealed, when the boys advance to their second year, they start receiving drug injections to accelerate their growth so their bodies can mature quickly. Hearing about this, Lee is stunned, as such a thing had never even crossed his mind. But Dmitri reminds him, did he forget they'll be fighting dragons in only 3 years? Obviously, Art can't just wait around for them to grow naturally. Demetrius is caught off guard when Lee admits he had always wished to grow into an adult as fast as possible because his entire life had been about competing with grown men. The memories of the past resurface in his mind from the moment he was just a child. Older boys in his neighborhood would beat him up and rob him of his belongings, and he couldn't do anything to defend himself simply because they were taller and more developed than him. Lee confides to Dimitri that he never had a joyful childhood. Survival was the only thing that mattered to him. With a sigh and a smile, Dimitri tells Lee that he is actually the most mature one in ARC. Later, at the training grounds, John announces that parachute drills are scheduled for today. All they need to do is follow what they've been practicing. They'll depart around 43:30, so they are ordered to check all their gear in advance. As he suits up with his parachute gear, Dimitri glances over at Lee, realizing they've just been discharged from one drill and are already jumping into another. Lee doesn't say much, just lets out a small laugh through his nose. That's when he notices his bag stuffed with food. It instantly hits him that this isn't going to be just a simple parachute exercise. Some clueless kids are already munching on their rations, but Dimitri's focus shifts instead towards Simon. Simon's expression lights up even though his hand trembles. Dimitri quietly checks with Lee if this is the final gifted recruit from the kingdom, admitting he's eager to fight him. Lee has to remind him this isn't a battlefield, it's parachute training. Simon catches Dimitri staring at him. It unsettles him, making him wonder what's wrong with the guy. Meanwhile, Lee's eyes flick over to Kuro, sitting one seat away, carefully avoiding his gaze. Then, as the helicopters arrive, Sergeant John orders everyone to move and board quickly. The boys climb into the choppers and take their seats under the watchful eyes of the sergeants. Not long after liftoff, Joe, along with the rest of his squad, decides to head out as well. He mutters that it's time to let these kids deal with their own problems. Sometime later, Kuro realizes his thoughts are consumed entirely by Lee. From the very first time he saw him, he instinctively knew Lee was different, someone extraordinary, unlike anyone else. Time after time, before Lee would even arrive, Kuro would get visions of him, and each time those visions came true. Lee always appeared to save him, but now, tangled helplessly in a tree with his parachute wrapped around the branches, Kuro waits desperately for his friend. He looks everywhere, but Lee is nowhere to be seen. Overwhelmed, he starts crying, unable to imagine how he could possibly escape alone. Just an hour before, the helicopters had been soaring through the sky, carrying the boys, restless and curious. None of them had any clue where they were headed, only noticing how small and far ARC looked from up above. At that moment, Lee's bracelet buzzed with a new message. They were flying over a deserted island, and their mission was clear: drop down into the wilderness and begin survival training. The announcement came from John, already stationed in the water with his team to catch any cadets who slipped during the landing. His words were both reassuring and challenging as he explained the rules. Each recruit had only 2 days' worth of food in their bag. Everything beyond that would be up to them. The moment this was revealed, panic spread through the chopper. They had been expecting parachute practice, not 2 days of survival training on an uninhabited island. While most panicked, Dimitri just grinned, saying it sounded like camping. Some boys, including Kuro, burst into tears when John revealed that the instructors would only return after a full week, leaving them to survive until then. Later, the trainers were pulling boys out of the water, hauling the last stragglers into the boat, and checking with the subordinate if that was the final one. The subordinate confirmed, seeing no more cadets stranded. John then asked if the boys had been scattered properly during the landings. The subordinate explained that they had, but already 7 boys had grouped together. John warned his men not to underestimate these kids because of their age mentality-wise. They were no different from adults. Left on their own, they would start trying to dominate one another, steal rations, and do whatever it took to survive. And sure enough, that exact behavior had already started taking shape on the island. Carl, the leader of one group, ordered his lackeys to round up supplies and steal whatever they could before nightfall. He didn't care whether it belonged to Simon or Lee. The only thing that mattered was bringing it back. Just then, the group heard a boy screaming for help. The moment they heard it, they decided he would be their target. Grinning, all 7 of them followed the sound. Meanwhile, Lee had just climbed out of the ocean after landing in the water, which had probably drawn unwanted attention. So he made up his mind to find a campsite quickly. He pushed through the dense forest, forcing his way past the undergrowth. Thinking to himself, he realized that for kids who had never gone hungry before, 2 days of food would never last, which made him certain, if pushed into a corner, these kids would steal without hesitation. He even wondered if someone like Simon had ever known true hunger. Meanwhile, Simon was being confronted. He faced Dimitri, who seemed obsessed with trailing him for reasons he couldn't understand. Dimitri just grinned, asking if Simon was really the genius everyone claimed and insisting they spar. Simon turned away, refusing to waste his energy on him. Seeing that, Dimitri tried to stop him, saying he only wanted a friendly match. Simon glanced back, finding him utterly foolish. Still, Dimitri admitted it was sudden and said there would be plenty of time later, maybe they should get to know each other first. Annoyed, Simon simply walked off. By then, the sun was already beginning to set. Carl's gang had followed the cries and were close to their target. And when they finally saw who it was, they burst into laughter because it was just poor Kuro, dangling in a tree with his parachute caught in the branches. As Kuro begged for help, they mocked him and left, taking his bag of food. As they walked away, he shouted for them to take the bag but at least get him down. Carl turned back toward him. He sneered that Kuro should be grateful he was stuck up there, because if not, they'd have beaten him badly before robbing him. He told him to stay put and wait for the instructors. Claiming he wouldn't starve to death in just a week, Carl added that he wouldn't die of thirst either. It would probably rain. With that, the group walked off, laughing as they went. Poor Kuro cursed them as cruel, and soon the night fell. He cried endlessly, kicking his legs in hopes of breaking free. Then he thought of all the others, Simon, Dmitri, and the rest. He found it infuriating that he was always crying. The thought only made him angrier. Why couldn't he cry if he wanted to? His frustration only grew worse. He screamed loudly, sobbing in agony and despair. Eventually, he calmed down, drained of all his strength. That's when he thought he saw the image of a boy coming toward him, and then he actually heard the sound of bushes rustling. Sure enough, Lee appeared, making his way toward Kuro. Lee stood in shock, looking up at the tree as he tried to understand what had happened. By morning, Lee had already built a campsite and was outside sharpening sticks. Crybaby Kuro came out of the tent, still visibly anxious. Looking at his friend, Lee smiled warmly as he served him breakfast. Kuro glanced at Lee, knowing there wasn't enough food to spare, not wanting to burden him, but in the end, hunger won. He dug in quickly, cursing himself in his heart for being so pathetic. He kept thanking Lee again and again. After breakfast, Lee decided to search for water. All around the forest, drones and surveillance cameras monitored every cadet's movement. A senior officer sat in the observation room, casually smoking as he watched. As expected, Octo walked in, surprised to see John there, and scolded him about smoking. When John told him to shut it, Octo asked, wanting to know why he was even there, since clearly some student must have caught his attention. John motioned him closer to the screen, pointing out the most ridiculous kid. At that moment, one student, Nuthmeyer from Norway, decided it was absurd to survive a week on a deserted island. He didn't even want to reach it, so he built a raft and tried paddling back to Ark. Meanwhile, Lee and Kuro had located fresh water. They began filling their bottles, preparing before heading off again. As they began leaving, sweat drips down their faces under the blazing heat, making them realize how exhausting it is to move during the day. Because of this, they hurry toward their camp. While walking, Lee's head is filled with thoughts. He knows that survival means they must find food, yet he hasn't spotted even a single coconut, which makes him realize why stealing becomes the only option for many. Lost in thought, he continues walking without focus. Suddenly, Kuro grabs him from behind, pulling him back. Right in front of them lies a deep hole in the ground. If Kuro hadn't noticed, they could have fallen in and been trapped for days. What makes it more suspicious is that the pit was hidden with branches and grass, making it impossible to detect normally, yet somehow Kuro sensed it. When Lee asks how, Kuro hesitates, but Lee catches on, realizing that Kuro really could see it. When Kuro tries to play it off by speaking in metaphors, Lee understands the truth. Kuro actually saw it coming. This is the benefit of having a special ability. Lee concludes that his companion must possess short-term foresight, an incredibly rare and valuable gift. Though curious, Lee doesn't push him for answers, only wondering if the island environment somehow awakened Kuro's power. But he is certain about one thing: this survival test will prove Kuro's ability without a doubt. Meanwhile, Carl and his crew arrive at Lee and Kuro's camp. They don't find any supply bags, only 2 trays, which makes them realize 2 people are living there. One of Carl's boys suggests wrecking the camp, but Carl stops him, reasoning that the owners are just out fetching water or something. Instead, Carl decides they'll return later at night and catch them while they're asleep. Before long, Lee and Kuro arrive back at their camp, ready to collapse from exhaustion. But Lee instantly stiffens when his eyes land on the rock nearby. He notices 2 distinct sets of footprints circling the tent, plus additional steps leading farther away. With sharp instincts, Lee is absolutely certain that whoever moves in groups will return to raid their supplies, so he tells Kuro they must dismantle the parachute and relocate. With no other choice, they pack up and start searching for a safer spot before darkness falls. Suddenly, Kuro stumbles backward. That's when Lee realizes Kuro is having another vision. Kuro's eyes shut tight, clearly distressed, unable to keep them open as he sees in his mind a black panther lunging at Lee. Terrified, he snaps his eyes open and shoves Lee to the ground, just in time to keep the panther from tackling him. And at that exact moment, a black panther really does leap from the bushes. It lands between them, growling, then fixes its glare on Lee and roars fiercely. Lee is helpless. His spear lies on the ground, too far from reach. Accepting his fate, he closes his eyes. And the panther is struck by a powerful burst of flame and bolts away. Lee quickly turns, shocked to see what just happened. It is Jose, casting fire magic with his psychic ability. He asks Lee if he's alright, while Lee still struggles to process what just occurred. After saving them from danger, Jose is stunned to see Crybaby Kuro standing beside Lee. Both Lee and Kuro glance down at Jose's leg. Concern is clear in their faces as they ask how he got injured. Jose explains that some boys had set up a trap, leaving him barely able to stand. Lee immediately suspects these are the same troublemakers who tried to target him earlier. Jose, however, thinks it might just be a gang of thieves wandering the island. He adds there wasn't anything worth stealing anyway, because right after being hurt, he already ate all his rations to prevent anyone from taking them. Lee can only shake his head at Jose's reckless choice, then suggests they focus on finding a safe shelter instead. Elsewhere, Karl-Heinz is lost in thought. His mind drifts back to when his father forced him to quit acting and enroll in ARC. His father believed he possessed psychic talent. If trained as a psyker, his father was sure he could rise above ordinary people and gain real authority. It wasn't just ambition, it was strategy. His father knew that once the war ended, psykers would be prized soldiers, holding both power and influence. Meanwhile, on another side of the forest, Dmitri is lying on the ground, gasping for air. Simon stands nearby, reminding him they don't have much time left if they want to eat. Watching Dmitri struggle, Simon questions how he'll survive the remaining 5 days of training. Forcing himself upright, Dmitri stretches his arms and declares that he's built for physical endurance. If he wants to be an elite striker, this intensity is necessary. Simon calls him foolish, pointing out that psykers win battles through their psychic powers, not raw muscle. Dramatically sighing, Dmitri admits he misses Han Li, saying Li is the only one who can match him in a real weapon fight. When Simon learns that Dmitri has already fought Han Li using his power, he is surprised. Dmitri secretly smirks, knowing Simon has taken the bait and is now eager to duel. Internally, he thanks Han Li for setting this up unknowingly. By the next morning, Han Li, together with Jose and Kuro, discuss their plans inside the shelter. They decide it's best to stick together for the remainder of training. The two prepare to head out in search of firewood and food. Because of his injury, Jose is asked to stay behind and guard the shelter. Though embarrassed, he agrees. Li reassures him, reminding Jose that his combustion ability gives them an edge in survival no matter what. When Li and Kuro arrive at the river, Li spots a good chance to gather food. Kuro admits he doesn't know how to fish, especially with no tools at hand. Li gives him a knowing smile, thanking him for saving his life yesterday and for finding their cave. He explains that at first, helping Kuro felt like a simple favor, but now he realizes survival cannot be one-sided. Over the days spent together, Li has become convinced that Kuro is a true prodigy in psychic ability. Kuro is startled, overwhelmed by the idea that Han Li sees him not just as a partner, but as a friend he wants to face challenges with. To Kuro, that kindness feels almost unreal, especially after the bullying and racism he suffered growing up in a Japanese orphanage. Activating his telekinesis, Kuro listens carefully as Li lays out his fishing plan. Crouching near the water's edge, he uses short-term foresight to predict where fish will swim. With psychic control, he guides them closer to the shore. Within minutes, they manage to catch 8 fish without any tools at all. Li praises Kuro, genuinely impressed. Together, they head back toward their shelter, eager to see Jose's reaction. But as they near the cave, Li feels a sudden wave of unease. His steps quicken, his balance unsteady. Rushing inside, Li finds Jose collapsed on the ground. This time, his wounds look even more severe than before. Earlier, after catching one of Dimitri's thrown swords, Simon could already tell that Dimitri wasn't here for just a casual duel. Dimitri's flimsy excuse about experimenting with dual wielding only made Simon's instincts sharper. If Dmitri is truly capable of fighting Han Li on even ground, then he's almost certainly Class B's representative. The tension in his face confirms it. The rumors of his promotion to Class A demand proof, and Simon intends to test him himself. The spar begins as both step forward boldly, swords raised in mirrored arcs. The steel clashes sharply, each strike filled with precision and intent. Simon presses forward with relentless aggression, forcing Dmitri to defend each blow. Yet Dmitri refuses to crumble, holding his guard steady. His counters are swift and sharp. The duel becomes a contest of stamina, each movement growing faster as they push to overwhelm the other's defenses. Their footwork constantly shifts, blades ringing in quick, sharp rhythm. The flow of attack and defense moves like a deadly dance. Neither gives way, refusing to leave an opening. Gradually, Simon's advantage in psychic combat begins to shine through. At last, one decisive strike ends the duel in Simon's favor. In physical weapon combat, Dmitri might have taken victory, but when it comes to psychers, Simon dominates. The result leaves Simon quietly wondering how Han Li's strength truly compares against Dimitri's. Back at the cave, Han Li is shaken and not himself after seeing Jose's battered condition. The wounds are still fresh, caused by an earlier ambush, and the sight leaves Li filled with dread. Karl-Heinz and his 7 men stormed into the shelter by force. He stripped it clean of supplies and left behind a warning. Jose, shaken, thought moving to a safer place would be the best choice, but Han Li had no intention of letting things end like that. He could never forgive anyone who dared to harm his friends, and a plan quickly took shape. They would let Karl-Heinz believe he owned the cave for now, giving him the illusion of control, only to take it back on their own terms. The counterstrike would begin once nightfall arrived. As the darkness settled in, Han Li and Kuro crouched low in the bushes. Their eyes stayed locked on the cave's entrance, where, just as expected, the gang had gathered to use it as their shelter. Han Li assessed the situation with calm certainty, convinced they could bring every last one of them down. Kuro kept silent, his resolve steady, determined not to fail the one person who had trusted him. The attack opened with precision as stones lifted into the air under Kuro's telekinetic control. They flew without warning, striking the guards before they knew what hit them. Chaos rippled through the gang as more stones followed, raining down in a relentless barrage. Karl-Heinz barked for the rest of his men to come outside. But even with reinforcements, the pressure did not ease. The gang pushed forward, dodging desperately as they advanced toward the bushes. When they closed in, Han Li suddenly burst from cover, weapon in hand. His strikes were sharp and decisive, cutting down each threat before they had the chance to react. Within moments, the guards were sprawled on the ground, silence falling heavy over the night. At last, Karl-Heinz himself stepped forward, every movement dripping with anger. Han Li stood tall and unshaken, ready for the confrontation that was now unavoidable. Karl-Heinz froze when his eyes met the young man's, disbelief flashing across his face as he recognized who he was. The thought that this boy alone had defeated 6 of his men was something he could hardly accept. His sharp gaze swept over the area, suspicion gnawing at him. Someone had to be backing Han Li. There was no way he managed this alone. But at Han Li's subtle signal, Kuro stepped out from behind the bushes. Karl-Heinz's expression twisted with fury as he realized it had been only 2 boys who humiliated his men. The sting of it burned deep. Han Li stepped forward, his voice firm and unwavering, declaring they had come to avenge Jose. His words carried weight, promising this fight was no sparring match and that he would hold nothing back. Karl-Heinz snapped, patience shattered. Grabbing a sturdy stick from the ground, he charged with unrestrained fury, his movements fast but reckless, blinded by anger. Yet, as he lunged, Han Li struck back with measured precision, hitting him hard enough to knock the air from his lungs. Calmly, almost like he was lecturing him, Han Li told him this was only the beginning, warning Karl-Heinz to tread carefully. The taunt cut deep. Unable to tolerate such condescension, Karl-Heinz swung again, his attacks wild and desperate. But no matter how much force he poured into them, Han Li deflected each one with ease. A well-placed counter sent Karl-Heinz sprawling once more. On the ground, he stared up in disbelief, unable to understand how Han Li carried such overwhelming strength. Han Li stepped closer, his shadow looming over him, eyes sharp with unspoken anger, not only for the ambush, but for attacking Jose while he was already injured. Karl-Heinz glared back, his pride roaring in protest at being looked down upon. Once, he had been celebrated in Germany, a prodigy, a rising actor whose fame his father exploited for political gain. Yet no matter how much his father achieved, his greed only pushed him further. Karl-Heinz knew all too well the pressure of being used, but it did nothing to dull the humiliation he now endured. Fueled by rage, Karl-Heinz surged back to his feet. He refused to believe he had come all this way only to be stopped here. Gathering every ounce of strength, he drove his fist into Han Li, forcing the protagonist backward. Seeing this, Kuro's composure cracked, panic flooding his face as he rushed in. But Karl-Heinz roared at him to stay back. He kept hammering blows onto Han Li, knocking him to the ground and towering above him. Karl-Heinz snarled that he would never again allow anyone to stand over him. Kuro could no longer stay still. His telekinesis flared to life, his trembling voice demanding Karl-Heinz release Han Li. But Karl-Heinz grabbed Kuro with one hand, lifting him with ease. Cold words dripped from his lips, dismissing Han Li's companion as useless and insignificant. That insult sealed Karl-Heinz's downfall. In the next instant, Han Li surged up from the ground, his fist smashing into Karl-Heinz's cheek. The impact sent him stumbling before crashing to the earth with a heavy thud. Han Li's voice thundered with fury, declaring that Karl-Heinz was the one who was useless. He spat that Jose, Oro, Dimitri, and Simon, all of them, were far better than him. Those words hit harder than any punch. Karl-Heinz felt them sink deep into his chest, a bitter truth he could not rise above. The fight drained out of him. Han Li raised his stick again, but stopped when he saw Karl-Heinz no longer resisting. Instead of striking, he told him to find another path if he truly wanted to climb higher. His voice hardened as he issued one last warning. If Karl-Heinz ever touched his friends again, there would be no mercy. With that, Han Li turned his back and walked away, Kuro at his side. Left on the ground, Karl-Heinz breathed heavily, an odd relief washing over him. Deep down, he had never wanted to become a psyker to begin with. In the days that followed, Karl-Heinz departed the Ark of his own accord. Han Li spent the last 3 days on the deserted island, with Jose and Kuro remaining on guard until help arrived. When rescue helicopters finally descended from the sky, Jose admitted he never wanted to face such an ordeal again. Han Li agreed without hesitation. Those they had protected gathered around, offering heartfelt thanks for, sharing food and helping them survive. Jose, smiling faintly, gave all credit to Han Li, insisting none of it would have been possible without him. Just then, a familiar voice rang out from their watches. Sergeant John Red. He announced the survival training was officially over. Dimitri and Simon brightened at the news, as though a burden had been lifted. John Red explained they would soon be called to board the helicopters, but there was more. This training, he revealed, had never been only about survival. The instructors had been watching from the start. They were searching for the rare few worthy of advancement. Out of everyone, only 4 names earned unanimous approval: Jose, Simon, Dimitri, and Han Li. The entire ordeal had been a test to uncover hidden diamonds, those with the potential to become humanity's defenders. Now, these 4 stood as candidates for Level 2 at the Ark. Level 2, huh? Later, Han Li was resting when Jose came over. inviting him to play soccer. Though he admitted he wasn't much of a player, Han Li agreed. They headed to the playground, lively because of a rare holiday. Jokingly, he warned Simon not to, use psychic powers during the game. Holidays were unusual, granted only when something major occurred. This time, all Level 1 instructors were meeting to evaluate candidates for promotion to Level 2. Inside the hall, the atmosphere grew formal as Chief of Staff Alexander Recker called the meeting to order. Sasha Grace, head researcher of Ward 2, asked for a report on the 4 chosen candidates. Alexander stated that Dimitri and Simon were fully prepared, even exceeding expectations. Han Li, however, had the lowest psychic rating since the day he enrolled. Without John Red's intervention, he would have remained stuck in Class D. Since John had personally selected him for advancement, Alexander pressed him for justification. Weichin spoke up, praising Han Li's weapon mastery, patience, and discipline traits vital for any soldier. Alexander was surprised to hear such words of approval from him. John Red added that Han Li's telekinetic control was unusually refined, and that he often devised clever ideas without needing instruction. Out on the playground, Han Li impressed Jose by playing with unexpected skill. Mater kept teasing Simon about his English roots, refusing to let it go. Meanwhile, inside the meeting, the discussion shifted toward Kuro. Sasha Grace raised the possibility of his advancement, pointing out the mental strain caused by the post-advancement transformation, the process that turns them into adults. John countered, arguing that Kuro's psychic growth already surpassed most prodigies, and that his short-term foresight was invaluable. Still, his unstable mentality made him risky, which was why Han Li's advancement was equally crucial. He acted as Kuro's older brother, stabilizing him. Alexander noted how firmly both John and Wei Chen supported Han Li's case. Back outside, the duo's teamwork paid off again, scoring another goal. Their celebration didn't last long as John Red arrived, announcing the results. All candidates had been approved. Jose congratulated Han Li, and the two shook hands, promising they'd see each other again. John Red then ordered the rest to return to their dorms, while those advancing were told to pack and prepare. Han Li thanked him sincerely, both for the evaluation and for his earlier selection as Class D's representative. Sean warned him there was no turning back now. If he completed Level 2, they would cross paths again. Han Li saluted before departing. Together, Dimitri, Kuro, Simon, and Han Li made their way toward Medical Ward 2. Kuro, nervous, fidgeted at the thought of the operation that would force them into adulthood. Han Li reassured him, saying they would face it together. Dimitri, in contrast, seemed almost eager for the strength to come, which annoyed Simon. Soon, they arrived at Medical Ward 2. Sasha Grace welcomed them and carefully explained the process ahead. Weeks of incubation would be followed by 3 weeks of rehabilitation training. Watching Han Li's calm demeanor as he encouraged the group, Sasha began to understand why John Red had pushed so strongly for his advancement. During the first week, Sasha personally inserted the culture fluid into the transparent incubation chambers. Inside, Han Li, Dimitri, Simon, and Kuro felt the crushing confinement pressing on their minds and bodies. Sasha knew this suffocating sensation was common. Every child faced claustrophobia at this stage. She focused on finishing quickly, comforted only by the fact that they would soon fall asleep. Once the sedatives took effect, Sasha and her team moved in with needles and surgical tools, successfully completing the first week without incident. But the next procedure would be far more critical, one that could decide the children's futures. Another doctor urged Sasha to take a break, noticing her fatigue. In the quiet of the restroom, she found John Red already seated. Taking a place across from him, she questioned why he kept visiting Ward 2 if he claimed to have no interest in the children. Raynor answered coldly, he was only here to make sure the doctor didn't ruin or destroy what he called his assets. Sasha assured him that everything had gone smoothly so far. At that very moment, however, the second culture fluid was being administered, a dangerous compound infused with a dragon's psychic core, concentrated liquid laced with diluted fragments of a dragon's heart. John believed forcing the children to resonate with the dragon's core would let them wield psychic abilities more naturally. Suddenly, an alarm blared, shattering the calm. Han Li had regained consciousness ahead of schedule. Sasha froze, knowing he was about to endure excruciating pain. She rushed toward his chamber to stop the advancement, but John Red caught her arm, holding her back. His order was simple. Han Li must advance to level 2, no matter the cost. 5 weeks later, Han Li emerged as a fully grown adult. Sasha sat across from him. Astonished by the transformation, she admitted his case was unprecedented. No psyker had ever shown such resistance to psychic powers. Her thoughts drifted back to the day in incubation when she tried to halt the procedure, only to be overruled by John's unyielding determination. Now, seeing him alive and stable, she felt a rare relief. Sasha explained that his growth was purely physical, with almost no increase in psychic power. Han Li, however, felt invigorated, relieved that he no longer risked expulsion for poor grades. His confidence surprised Sasha, leaving her to wonder how someone with such mental strength could possess so little psychic ability. Leaving her office, Han Li ran into Dmitri, who greeted him warmly. They reflected on how quickly the weeks had passed and how much each of them had changed, especially Kuro. Han Li admitted he was simply glad they had all survived, but Simon bristled, accusing him of acting like a leader. Dmitri brushed it off, saying Simon's irritation was nothing more than adolescent moodiness. At the Level 2 building, the exterior looked much like Level 1, but the structure inside was entirely different. Training was now divided into squads of 4 to 8 members, with a total of 12 squads. Han Li struggled to adapt to having his own room after so long in shared quarters. He and Kuro were placed in Squad 7. Their leader, Kato Suki, soon approached with his companion, laying out the core training programs, firearms, airborne maneuvers, and mock battles. He pressed them to practice their firearm skills, explaining that modern weapons still worked against low-intelligence creatures like ogres, grunts, and werewolves. The higher intelligence beings known as Elu served as mid-level commanders and could wield psychic abilities. Against them, physical weapons were useless until their psychic energy ran out. Unlike dragons, however, their reserves were limited. Once drained, they became easy targets. Ito emphasized that airborne training and mock battles were just as important. The mock battles were held in artificial forests within the Ark, often set up as capture-the-flag competitions that demanded strategy and highlighted individual skill. Despite the lack of sharpened blades, the matches were still dangerous. Steel weapons could cause serious injuries. Airborne training relied on air bits, where the goal was to knock opponents down, while supporters manipulated the devices for movement or, at times, even offense. Until now, Squad 7 had lacked strong psychers to serve as supporters. Pointing toward Kuro, Kato declared that this problem was solved. Kuro hesitated, but Ato's companion cut him off bluntly, saying refusal was not an option. Han Li stepped in, trying to ease the tension, assuring them Kuro would cooperate, but warning that too much pressure would only hurt his performance. The companion dismissed Han Li with a sneer. Kato smirked, saying he expected nothing from the lowest-ranked psychic in the squad. He admitted he only accepted Han Li because of Kuro, and told him to stay out of his way. Han Li met his hand with a steady grip, agreeing not to interfere, while silently vowing to break Kato's arrogance and see how long he could hold on to his superiority. Later, Han Li pushed open the bathroom door. Turning on the tap, he stood under the shower, eyes closed as memories of training replayed in his mind. He remembered practicing alongside his squad, steadying his aim, and firing a clean, perfect shot. A faint smirk crossed his lips as he muttered that the shot was solid. Now Kato wouldn't be able to call him a burden to the team. But then Kato barked at Han Li's best friend, demanding to know what he was doing. Kuro trembled, clutching his gun tightly. Ato dragged a hand over his face in frustration, muttering that Kuro couldn't do anything right. Snapping back to the present, water streamed down Han Li's head. As he rubbed his scalp, one thought lingered. Was he still not good enough to be acknowledged? He stepped out of the steamy bath with that doubt weighing on his mind. Later, Kato pointed directly at him, announcing he would be put on standby. He explained that in mock battle training, larger squads had to adjust roles, especially since they already had too many close combat fighters like Han Li. Kato stepped in closer, noting that level 2 cadets were free to spectate training matches, so there was no need to take things too seriously. Han Li would still get to watch. Quietly, Han Li nodded in understanding. Entering the battle hall, Han Li realized today's match was a capture-the-flag exercise, Squad 3 against Squad 9. The instructor grinned and gestured at the unfamiliar faces, urging his team to analyze their strategies. Han Li looked up and instantly recognized him. It was Del Simon. Whispers rippled among the members at the site. Someone blurts out if that's really Del Simon from the Red Squad, the so-called psychic genius. Another scoffs under their breath, saying he just looks like some arrogant punk. The Blue Squad tightens their grips on their slender, razor-sharp blades. One Red Squad fighter jabs a finger forward, bragging that with their unstoppable cycle in play, they'll crush the enemy and snatch the flag without breaking a sweat. Blue Squad lets out a roar, charging in with orders to take the enemy down before any psychic tricks can even start. But right before they clash, the blades vanish from Blue Squad's hands, leaving them frozen in shock. Dale Simon steps forward, surging with unleashed psychic energy. Blue lightning bursts from his palm, exploding straight into the ranks of the Blue Squad. The rest of the Red Squad doesn't hesitate, jumping in right behind him. With blades drawn, they swarm their opponents, overwhelming them in an instant. And just like that, the flag is theirs. A triumphant voice rings out, saying there's no point in watching further total domination has already been shown. Someone chuckles, pointing out how vital a strong psyker is in these mock battles. He gestures toward Kuro, suggesting their own plan should work the same way. With him, they can make it happen. Vice Squad leader stiffens at the comment and quickly looks away. Han Li steps forward, offering a different perspective. He points out that Squad 9 didn't use complex strategy or even the terrain to win, but instead leaned entirely on individual skill and raw ability. He's just about to explain more, when Kato cuts him off sharply. Something clicks in Han Li's mind, and he finally realizes why Kato has always held resentment toward him. A quiet squad mate calls out, motioning for Li to follow. Lao Che! Li complies, and the two step aside into a more secluded spot. The squad mate speaks openly, admitting that both he and Kato recognize Lee's talent, but they all agree Lee doesn't belong in Squad 7. Lee's thoughts spiral, realizing Kato must have been watching closely all along. Out loud, he asks why he supposedly doesn't fit. The answer comes fast, because Lee isn't afraid to voice opinions that challenge Kato's leadership. The squad mate concedes that the protagonist often makes sharper calls, but there's a bigger issue. Lee closes his eyes, the realization hitting him that Squad 7 can only have one leader. Even a sliver of doubt in Kato's command could split the team. As long as Kato is in charge, Lee will never get the chance to compete. The squad mate advises him to file for a transfer when the time feels right. Then he walks off, leaving Lee in silence. Lee lowers his head and mutters softly to himself that now he finally understands. A squad leader must hold absolute trust. By challenging Kato's authority, he's put that delicate balance in danger. Resolute, Lee walks to the office, transfer request in hand, and submits it to an instructor. The instructor scans the document, reads the name, raises a brow, and asks if Lee is truly serious. He stammers out, "Leah, Leah, Leah, Leah," over and over. Lee nods firmly once. The instructor nods back, explaining that all Level 2 instructors must review it together, so the process may take a while. Later, Han Lee sits on his bed, thoughts still spinning. He reasons that this is better. With no mock battles ahead, he can dedicate himself fully to training and sharpening his abilities. He murmurs that he'll also use the time to study other squads, analyze their approaches, and craft strategies of his own. Kuro appears in the doorway, calling out to him. Lee acknowledges him with a nod and invites him inside. Kuro steps in, sits beside him, and asks about his talk with the vice squad leader. Lee brushes it aside and instead asks about tomorrow's airborne match. Kuro explains that he can now handle up to 4 airbits at once, and that's not even counting passengers. Lee praises him, impressed by his psychic growth. He adds that Kuro's goal to be ranked among the top level 2 performers isn't unrealistic. Our protagonist grins and promises to cheer him on. Kuro's face flushes slightly, and he nods. On the battle screen, members gather, whispering about the hype surrounding Kuro's performance. Everyone is curious to see what new ability he'll reveal. The match kicks off against the Red Squad. Kato glances at Kuro and entrusts the battle to him. Kuro steps forward, eyes sharp and filled with determination. Squad 1 faces off against Squad 7 in the airborne test. Lee observes closely, noting that most dragons can fly, meaning the fight is waged largely in the skies. Beyond basic jumps, airbits serve as the key gear in these aerial battles. Lee knows that. Typically, one person manages 2 airbits from the rear. That way, frontline fighters burn less psychic energy. Lee murmurs that this setup is perfect for Kuro, since he can handle 4 airbits on his own. Kato smirks, signaling his squad to execute the surefire victory plan. He had given his orders well in advance. Red Squad charges in, blades gleaming under the lights. Blue Squad quickly realizes everything is unfolding exactly as Kato had predicted. Members of Blue Squad gesture to one another and split into 2 groups. They rush forward aggressively, cutting down opponents one at a time, overpowering Red Squad's fighters with sheer speed. 2 Red members fight desperately, questioning how their comrades are falling so easily. Kato mutters under his breath that this is all according to plan. Ripples of surprise spread through the hall. Viewers wonder if Squad 7 is always this strong, or if they can really anticipate every move. Before the fight, Kato had explained Squad 1's weakness and support. He had pointed to Kuro, stating Kuro could handle 4 airbits at once, and even manage both his own and the vice leaders using his foresight. Kuro had nodded reluctantly. Another squad mate had smirked, saying, since their close combat was already top tier, they should focus on that and eliminate opponents quickly. Kato had agreed with a smile. Back on the battlefield, Lee watches as Kato's plan unfolds flawlessly. Sato shouts, pushing his team to keep pressing the assault. Kuro tenses, whispering that if he fails here, the whole squad loses because of him. A Red Squad member wipes sweat from his forehead, shocked that only 2 of them remain. Someone mutters aloud, wondering if they can't just take out the enemy's supporter. One signals the start of a risky play and charges straight ahead. Kato smirks, asking if they really intend to attack head-on, but before Blue Squad can react, Red Squad cuts them down one after another. The Red Squad leader himself floats directly toward Kuro. Kato shouts, ordering someone to get Kuro out of the line of fire. Lee watches closely, wondering if Kuro will react in time. Kuro spots the enemy coming at him and rushes forward, charging his psychic power, while the others hold off the remaining attackers. Suddenly, one teammate yells out that Kuro has lost consciousness. The whispers in the hall erupt, everyone buzzing about the protagonist's friend and his incredible abilities. Lee mutters that Kato's entire plan rests on Kuro's shoulders alone. He realizes the weight of that pressure must have been crushing, which is why the victory ended this way. Lee clenches his jaw, turns his back, and mutters that if he were the leader, he'd never have left Kuro on his own like that. 3 weeks later, inside the office, an instructor flips through Lee's documents, announcing they've reviewed his request. The outcome is positive. The instructor hands Lee the papers, remarking that his level 1 leader evaluation was excellent. Every instructor agrees he deserves a chance, but they also want to test his popularity. Lee accepts the paper. It lists the conditions required to form a squad. He mutters that by following these rules, every current squad leader will immediately hate him, but he steels himself. He can handle it. He steps into the hallway, leans against the wall with eyes shut, thinking about who he should recruit first. 2 names flash in his mind immediately. He sighs, realizing Jose isn't around, so he decides to talk with Kuro first. But suddenly, another thought hits him. Straightening up, he mutters, "There's one more person." He strides quickly to a room and knocks on the door. The door slides open. A guy tilts his head and greets him casually. Meanwhile, Kato grows tense. His squad's winning streak keeps slipping because of Kuro. Another member remarks they should have just recruited Simon instead. Right now, Kato actually agrees with his squad mates. Simon isn't just good in close combat, his psychic ability is insane and he's taken down plenty of opponents by himself. Still, they keep grumbling that Kuro is overrated, and the only reason they use him is because they've got no one else. Lee overhears every word, hidden behind a pillar. Later, he seeks out Dimitri and tells him about starting a brand new squad. Hearing that, Dimitri asks who else Lee has in mind besides himself. Without a second thought, Lee admits Kuro is part of the plan, and honestly, the whole idea of forming a squad started just so he could recruit him. Dimitri smirks, reminding Lee that no squad leader would ever hand over one of their members. Ignoring the jab, Lee asks if Dimitri wants to join anyway. But Dimitri turns him down politely. He explains he's already lined up to be Squad 5's next leader and can't just abandon his guys. The response leaves Lee disappointed. But then he smirks when Dimitri adds that it's way more exciting to fight against Lee than to fight alongside him. With a grin, Lee taps his chest and warns Dimitri not to cry when he wipes the floor with him. Dimitri fires back playfully, threatening to break Lee's arm. Later, while walking the hall, second years whisper about Lee, calling him arrogant for wanting to be a leader. But he doesn't care about the gossip. He already knows word spread about him recruiting and starting a squad. He also expected the leaders would gang up against him, especially Kato. Soon enough, Kato stands right in front of him with one squad mate by his side and Kuro at the edge. Kato demands to know if this is how Lee plans to repay him. He makes it clear he doesn't care if Lee leaves or builds his own squad, but he's not taking Kuro. Lee tries to explain that under Kato's leadership, Kuro will never shine. Kato sneers, telling him not to get cocky, insisting that Kuro will thrive as part of Squad 7. Lee pushes back, asking if Kato would also expect enemies to just stand still during battle. He insists he can push Kuro to reach his full potential, because that's what a commander is supposed to do, and he adds sharply that blaming others won't change results. Kato's whole body trembles with rage as he clenches his teeth. In a flash, he grabs Lee by the shirt, shouting that he won't let him take Kuro. Lee stares right back into Kato's eyes and calmly tells him it isn't his decision, it's Kuro's. Kato slowly turns his glare toward Kuro. His eyes darken, and he threatens to kill him if he dares leave. The threat makes Kuro flinch in fear. But Lee just smirks, saying Kato is all bark and would still be running his mouth even while getting buried. Hearing that, Kato throws a punch straight into Lee's face. Lee crashes down to the ground. Wiping his lip, he says he'll let it slide just this once. He's not about to waste time getting called in over this. With that, he turns to walk away, but before leaving, he tells Kuro he'll be waiting for him. As Lee leaves, whispers ripple behind him. People call him stupid, saying no one would betray their leader for some guy who hasn't even proven himself. Meanwhile, Kuro still stands frozen, trembling from everything that just happened. Lee walks on, wondering what to do next since everyone he had in mind has already turned him down. Distracted and lost in thought, he bumps right into a masked man. The stranger doesn't even glance back when Lee apologizes, just keeps moving at incredible speed. That pace alone makes Lee stop and notice. Then he catches sight of the guy's outfit, questioning if it's even allowed here. Just then, Lee gets a notification. All squad leaders are summoned to gather in front of the secondary infirmary. Soon, Sasha arrives to meet everyone. 6 newly advanced members are standing by, waiting for squad assignments. At the same time, she announces the new squad leader will get his pick first. She calls for Lee to step forward. Taking a breath, he introduces himself as the leader of Squad 13 and openly welcomes anyone willing to join, pointing out they're seriously shorthanded right now. Some laugh, mocking him for calling his squad shorthanded when he doesn't even have members. But then, a voice cuts through, volunteering himself. Lee turns and sees Jose, and his face instantly lights up. Later in the dorm, Jose listens to the whole story from Lee. He admits he just hopes they can get at least one more recruit. Lee thanks him sincerely, saying he always wanted to be on the same team as Jose. Jose scoffs, calling the others idiots for not stepping up, since they have no idea how talented Lee actually is. Standing, Jose says he'll head back to his room, but promises he'll start pulling in others tomorrow. Just then, a knock echoes at Lee's door. They open it, and their eyes widen. It's Kuro. He's bruised, bandaged, but smiling nervously. He told Kato he was leaving Squad 7. Of course, Kato didn't kill him, but he beat him senseless instead. Lee bursts out laughing, asking if this is really the same Kuro he remembers. Scratching his head awkwardly, Kuro laughs it off, saying it was nothing. Jose grins, thrilled that the trio is finally back together, and confident that no one can stand against them if they fight as one. Right then, another figure appears, Nuth Meyer. He asks if there's room for one more. He explains that most call Lee a traitor, so joining Squad 13 feels like the most interesting choice. Kuro points out Nuth was with them back in Class B. Lee remembers immediately and doesn't hesitate to welcome him aboard. With that, Squad 13 is officially formed. But they all know the truth. Every other squad is against them, and one slip-up could get their team dissolved. The pressure is heavy, but Lee is hopeful, confident they'll make it work. He tells his squad to rest up tomorrow. Squad 13's journey truly begins. The next morning, Grossman, chief instructor of the second years, greets Squad 13. He seems genuinely pleased to meet them, but his eyes immediately land on Kuro, noticing his injuries. Concerned, he asks about his face. Kuro smiles and lies, saying he just fell down the stairs. Grossman smirks, clearly unconvinced, but simply tells him to be more careful. He explains that starting today, Squad 13 will get a grace period before entering the matches. They'll have 3 weeks, then they'll compete. He adds that opponents and match categories will be assigned randomly, and Lee realizes Grossman is indirectly warning them. Today's event is a gun survival competition. Their opponents? Squad 9, famous for being the best in firearms training and champions of multiple survival matches. While hiding, Nuth yanks off his helmet, complaining it's suffocating. He clearly isn't taking things seriously, saying they just need to avoid getting shot. Seeing that, Lee slams the helmet back on his head, reminding him this isn't a joke, he could get himself killed. Leaning in close, Lee warns Nuth never to take it off under any circumstances. He won't risk losing his squad. Terrified, Nuth nods. Lee then explains their tactic, calling it the moving bunker. He warns them not to laugh since he literally just made the name up. His squad stares, dumbfounded, at the name. Right after that, they all get into position. The announcement declares the competition has started. Lee hypes up his team, telling them to show everyone what they're capable of. The second years watching from the sidelines cheer for Squad 9, yelling at them to crush Squad 13 and take out those so-called traitors. In the stands, Dimitri chuckles, realizing how famous Lee and his squad have become thanks to all the drama. Meanwhile, Simon quietly observes, curious what Lee will do, because in a shootout, their chances look slim. On the field, Squad 13 hides behind the trees. Squad 9 scans around, confused. They can't spot them anywhere. They realize Squad 13 is holding position near the starting line. So Squad 9 begins advancing. Noticing this, Nuth informs his team that Squad 9 is about 660 feet out and closing in fast. Panic sets in as Lee's squad realizes they're spread too far apart. They hadn't expected Squad 9 to move so aggressively, and they're already headed straight for Lee, Jose, and Kuro. Gasping for breath, Jose mutters how they weren't even given a moment to settle in. He wishes Nuth knew better, that instead of rushing to regroup, he should have distracted the enemy. Ironically, that's exactly what Nuth is doing now. But still, a shot rings out, striking Nuth in the left leg. He screams in pain. Through gritted teeth, he spots one opponent's outline moving. Raising his weapon, he fires back, determined to at least take one of them down. But the opponents duck behind trees. Nuth collapses to the ground, struggling to even stand. He drags himself behind cover as electric shots blast into the trees around him. Pressed against the trunk, Nuth remembers their plan. He should regroup with the squad. But with his leg like this, he'd only slow them down, so instead he decides to buy them some time. Confusion spreads through Squad 9. They wonder why they've only spotted Nuth. Where's the rest of the squad? Puzzled, one of them steps forward, ordering his teammates to cover him. Meanwhile, Lee signals his team to start moving now, since Nuth has already bought them enough time. They know Nuth is injured, yet instead of escaping with them, he chose to hold the enemy off. Jose believes it was the right call, since everyone managed to recover their stamina after spending so much energy earlier setting up traps and preparations. With telekinesis and bursts of power, they bring down a tree. Now is the moment to finally reveal what Squad 13 is truly capable of. Dimitri laughs, pointing out this strategy is only possible because of Kuro, and even Simon shares the same thought. Meanwhile, one enemy who moved forward notices Nuth hiding. Nuth is trying to reload his weapon, but it already feels too late. As the enemy has his gun aimed at Nuth, he laughs, thinking he's caught Nuth in a trap since Nuth is standing there alone. Dimitri, who's been watching nearby, assumes Squad 13 is finished, wondering what difference a tree branch could possibly make. Simon also realizes this tactic carries risks, and he knows Lee must have figured that out as well. Using the fallen tree as cover, Lee keeps firing back. The leader of Squad 9 regrets assembling a team of good shooters without psychic users, and Lee takes full advantage of that flaw. Under heavy fire, Squad 9 is forced to retreat behind the trees. Their leader orders them to stall the fight, certain that Squad 13's psyker will eventually run out of energy. While shooting, Lee acknowledges that this strategy isn't flawless. The tree shield is only meant to get them close enough to reach the range of Jose's ignition ability. Sticking to the plan, Jose releases a burst of fire. Squad 9 staggers backward, unable to figure out where the flames and smoke are coming from. The second years watching are shocked by the sudden turn of events. Squad 13, however, smirks, because Squad 9 is now blinded by thick smoke and can't see a thing. Struggling to breathe, some of them stumble out of hiding. Naturally, they are immediately taken down. With 2 members already eliminated, the remaining 2 try to stay calm, assuming their opponents are also blind inside the smoke. But then an electric gun fires at them, knocking them out as well. That's because Squad 13 has the ability to see through the smoke thanks to Kuro's outstanding psychic power. With that, Squad 13 secures the win. The entire arena erupts in noise. Some are cheering, some are jealous, some marvel at Kuro's abilities while others can't ignore Lee's sharp shooting. Dimitri feels genuinely happy for them, yet Simon, being competitive, can't help feeling uneasy. Lee exchanges glances with his squad. They are all thrilled by their first victory. Meanwhile, Grossman watches the screen. He wonders what should be done about Lee, realizing this guy is even more impressive than the rumors. As the celebration continues, they raise the glasses together. In the end, their hard work paid off, earning them a special meal for winning. Nuth is overjoyed, since along with the meal, they even receive drinks. Jose then insists that Lee give a toast as their squad leader, the one who guided them to victory. Scratching his head, Lee thanks everyone, admitting their plan was risky, but they won because each member played their part. Kuro disagrees with him, calling it a great plan instead. Yet Lee knows they were lucky. The opponents were easier to read precisely because of their strength. It was obvious Squad 9 would rely on its best sharpshooters. Suddenly, in his excitement, Nuth blurts out that he wasn't wrong for choosing Lee, then quickly feels embarrassed. Looking at the updated scores, Grossman's face turns red with anger, shocked that Lee's team actually defeated Squad 9, the very team he handpicked to crush them. Sitting back, the instructor considers sending Squad 7 against Squad 13, though even then he worries that Lee's squad might come out on top again. Still, Grossman resolves to make sure Squad 13 is defeated no matter what. Meanwhile, Lee finds himself unable to sleep. It feels just like the anxiety he had before facing expulsion, only now he has the best squad he could ask for. With them by his side, he believes they'll keep winning, no matter who their opponents are. The next day at the training grounds, the match is set between Squad 1 and Squad 13, with victory decided by who defeats the opposing captain. Standing in the arena, Squad 13 goes over their plan. They focus on keeping an eye on Kuro and Jose, since their psychic abilities are especially dangerous. Two members of Squad 1 prepare to mark them, determined to disrupt Squad 13's concentration, especially since their captain is considered the strongest fighter in their division. Watching from the big screens, Dimitri smirks, knowing the instructor is furious. First Squad 13 caused chaos in the survival gun match, and now they're up against Squad 1. Everyone knows their true target is the captain in the red bandana, a massive, hulking fighter expected to give Squad 13 serious trouble. At the same time, the hulking captain recalls his role as the team's front line, with the others meant to block long-range attacks. Dimitri can't hide his excitement to see Lee's strategy, but Simon rolls his eyes, telling him to shut up and just watch, while also wondering why this bald guy is even standing next to him. As Squad 1 advances, sweat runs down their faces because they can't spot Kuro anywhere. What shocks them even more is realizing Kuro is actually the captain. On the other hand, Kuro himself is terrified, frozen in panic. Yet Nuth and Jose stand firm in front of him, acting as shields and telling him not to worry. The blue bandana fighter sticks to the plan, ignoring the fact that Lee is nowhere to be seen. With that, Squad 1 charges in with full force. Meanwhile, our boy is perched on a nearby tree, waiting for the right moment to strike. Nuth and Jose hold back their opponents with their abilities, managing to stall them. It's clear they don't need to defeat the whole team, only the captain matters. From the tree, Lee signals Kuro to get ready. Forward. In an instant, the main character leaps down from the tree. Seeing this, Nuth and Jose grab Squad 1's captain instead of holding off the two other fighters. But Squad 1 misinterprets the move, thinking their captain is shoving them aside to attack Kuro. Weapons raised, Squad 1's members lunge at Kuro, not realizing Squad 13 had planned for this. At that very moment, Lee is diving straight toward their captain. The two opposing members are convinced victory is already theirs. They don't realize Kuro is focusing on telekinesis. The blue bandana fighter is baffled, seeing Kuro ignore their attack entirely. Then a thunderous crash echoes from behind them. With telekinesis guiding him, Lee lands directly on the enemy captain, taking him out. In the observation room, everyone is left speechless. Some are confused about how Lee jumped from the tree, others call him reckless, but none of it matters because they're all cheering for his insane victory. Even Dimitri chuckles, watching the crowd roar for Lee. And it makes sense, since the MC's techniques are genuinely impressive. Members of other squads go wild, laughing at the irony that Squad 7's leader didn't recruit Lee, yet now he's outshining everyone. Overhearing this, Kato clenches his teeth, his whole body trembling in fury. The day before their match with Squad 7, Han Lee confidently says their current pace will give them no problem in real combat. He even praises Kuro as incredible, to which Kuro modestly replies that Han Lee is more amazing, though he admits he'll have to risk his life tomorrow. Lee then explains that controlling a living body with telekinesis is extremely hard. If it were simple, every psyker would already be able to fly. His plan is to hide at a high point, remain undetected, and then jump down, relying on Kuro to slow his fall so neither he nor his opponent gets killed. But during training, things go wrong and Han Lee ends up breaking his arm. Kuro feels guilty and apologizes. Lee reassures him that nobody died and it was a difficult task anyway, meaning Kuro still did well. Nuth adds that without Kuro's support, the beast they fought wouldn't have been defeated. Later, Jose remarks that once Lee's arm is fully healed, there shouldn't be any battles scheduled soon. But Kato sees the schedule and is shocked. Just 2 days later, Squad 13 is set to face Airborne Battle Squad 7. In a rush, Kato storms into Grossman's office. Grossman is surprised to see Kato coming forward to talk. Meanwhile, Squad 13 is furious about the setup, since being forced into battle with an injured member feels completely unfair. Jose shouts that it's practically telling him to lose, while Nuth adds that Squad 7 will be thrilled to crush them. Tension rises, and Jose yells again about how unjust the situation is. Back in Grossman's office, it becomes clear the match was arranged intentionally to hand Squad 7 the win. Grossman even questions if Kato lacks confidence. Kato insists they could beat Squad 13 anytime, even without such advantages. Hearing this, Grossman orders him to guarantee their victory. As he leaves the office, Kato realizes his words carried no weight. Elsewhere, Lee tells his squad that whining about it won't change anything. He hasn't crafted a full strategy yet, but he is determined to come up with a plan before the battle. Suddenly, Kato interrupts their conversation, warning Lee not to bluff. He also questions if Han Lee can really fight with his injured arm. Lee admits it won't be easy, but says his right arm alone will be enough to defeat Squad 7. Kato warns him that winning an airborne battle takes more than raw confidence, pointing out that Lee's intelligence should already make that clear. Han Lee answers that he will prepare something special for the squad, and that if they don't give it their all, the humiliation will cut deep. Furious, Kato snaps back, threatening both Han Lee and Kuro. But with anger clear on his face, Han Lee warns Kato never to make such threats if he has never actually killed before. Enraged, Kato storms away, swearing that he will make Lee pay. Jose shakes his head, muttering that Kato is nothing but spiteful. Moving on, our MC admits that their opponents won't be easy to handle and tells the squad to head to the gym for training. As Han Lee evaluates the situation, he clearly recognizes the limits they are facing, even if, at his very best, Lee can only handle 2 airbits. Right now, he can barely control 1. At the same time, Jose would struggle to control even 2 airbits while using his combustion powers. And if they were to rely solely on Kuro like Squad 7 once did, the mental burden would crush him. Squad 7, even without a strong supporter, is already well-rounded in combat and psychic abilities. With Kato as their leader, their teamwork is on another level, making it impossible to beat them in a direct fight. Han Lee concludes they cannot win head-on. Suddenly, Jose rushes in, reporting a serious issue. With no combustible materials in the air, his ignition ability is almost completely useless. On top of that, with everyone flying around so fast, even landing a hit would be extremely difficult. Their opponents mock Squad 13, laughing that their skills pose no real threat. They also whisper that Han Lee is injured, and since Squad 13 barely has any airborne experience, their loss is guaranteed. Instructor Grossman, who normally balances matches so each squad has around a 50% chance of winning, has clearly rigged this one against them. Nuth sees through Grossman's setup and realizes this will be a brutal fight for Han Lee. Meanwhile, Kato rallies his own team with a loud call to crush the enemy and punish the traitors as they deserve. Spotting the enemy, Han Lee checks on Jose, who boldly promises to burn everything in their way, saying his role is key to the plan. As soon as the match begins, both squads unleash their airbits. Squad 7 is stunned to see Squad 13 deploy 16 airbits, a number that should be impossible for fighters at their level. Normally, level 2 fighters can only control 2 airbits each, or 4 for specialized supporters. Just 2 days earlier, 2 members of Squad 13 couldn't even handle 2, yet now they are fielding 16. Even if every member controlled 2 each, 10 would still be unaccounted for, far beyond what Kuro should be able to handle. The shocking display makes Kato tense and uncertain, but Han Lee steps forward with calm confidence, ready to shatter their opponent's composure. The opposing squad can hardly believe their eyes when they realize Squad 13 truly possesses 16 airbits, an amount that looks far too advanced and nearly impossible for their tier. Kato quickly tries to steady his team, telling them to calm down, follow the plan, and pick off their enemies one by one. At the same time, Lee remembers the endless hours of grueling training, pushing themselves with no breaks to sharpen their telekinesis. Though his skills were once considered below average, Lee discovered how to refine and focus his power with precision. Because of this, he not only gained the ability to move objects, but also learned how to launch them at incredible speed. The sheer velocity of his strikes is astonishing. Still, if his aim isn't perfect, the attacks can be dodged. Meanwhile, Jose analyzes the battlefield and realizes the harsh truth, since they are fighting in mid-air. There's nothing combustible around for him to ignite, leaving his combustion ability practically worthless. But as he keeps thinking, a new idea begins to form. Something nearby that could still be set on fire in the middle of the battle. During the clash, everyone is stunned when one of Squad 13's airbits explodes. The spectators whisper that each device costs a fortune, some guessing just one is worth more than an instructor's monthly salary. Despite the cost, someone yells that they should destroy every single one. Kato panics, realizing their enemies are trying to blow up all the airbits, rushing to stop them even though the explosions could hurt them as well. Suddenly, Grossman appears. He orders the madness to stop, and eventually the fight comes to an end. Later, Han Li is summoned to Grossman's office, where the instructor sits in silence, staring at him for 10 whole minutes. Lee thinks it would have been easier to deal with Sergeant Red, who at least would scream in his face. Finally, Grossman speaks, pointing out how insanely expensive the airbits are. He adds that without being an ARC, Lee could never pay back that cost in his lifetime. While admitting that Lee didn't technically break any rules, Grossman warns that his tactic was bound to cause controversy, though he admits some instructors might secretly admire the creativity. But Grossman himself disapproves, and tells Lee to notify him first before ever pulling something like that again. Han Li agrees, but then adds that if they had been fighting dragons, no one would care about costs or controversy because winning would be all that mattered. Grossman actually smiles at this, saying Lee sounds just like someone he knows, and even praises his mindset. On top of that, he tells Han Li that he looks forward to seeing his future battles, then dismisses him. Afterward, as Han Li walks away, he crosses paths with Kato. Kato sneers that even if Lee wins with such cowardly tricks, it will never earn him respect. Lee calmly answers that such judgments can be made later, and asks if Kato was waiting just to say that. Kato denies it, saying he was only passing by, but vows that he will crush Lee, warning him not to lose to anyone else before their showdown. Lee awkwardly agrees before heading back to his team, where Nuth greets him warmly, and Kuro happily announces their victory. Jose admits he worried their approach might have crossed the line, but Nuth explains it was still within the rules, though barely. After that, Kuro notices Jose's distracted expression, and Jose points to his digital watch, hinting at what always seems to happen during your celebrations. The display shows the next match is in 7 days. Squad 5 will face Squad 13 in a Capture the Flag contest. Lee realizes Squad 5 is known for excelling in direct clashes, exactly the type of challenge Grossman would set up. After an intense workout, Dimitri wipes away sweat, complaining about the heat and wanting nothing more than to shower. Suddenly, he spots someone and calls out to him. Then he corrects himself, addressing him as the former squad leader, since Dimitri now holds the position. With a smug grin, Dimitri says Squad 5 has been thriving under his leadership, placing a hand on the other man's shoulder as he teasingly asks if he's being ignored now that he's reached level 3. The response is ice cold and threatening, warning Dimitri to back off before things turn violent. Confused by the hostility, Dimitri asks what's wrong, but he quickly changes tone, saying they should settle it in a fight first and talk after. Lee notices the man in the skeleton mask, and is struck by how overwhelmingly strong he looks. The scene then shifts back to 6 days earlier, when Lee receives shocking news. Grossman tells him that Dimitri was suddenly injured and would not be able to compete in the upcoming match. But despite the setback, the competition would go on as planned. Without Dimitri, Squad 5 would lack proper leadership, making them look like an easy target. Grossman then reveals the real reason for calling Lee in. He hands Lee an application for squad transfer. Several members want to join Lee's team, since his reputation is for maximizing his squad's abilities, while Kato has been getting negative reviews. Grossman explains that most level 2 members would be able to compete immediately if accepted into Squad 13. Lee doesn't hesitate and accepts, knowing they can't afford to be selective. He welcomes the newcomers Domingo, Kasim, Andy, and Jongi Joe, then announces training will begin the very next day. Han Li also says he'll observe their abilities and assign roles accordingly. When he asks if anyone has objections, Jang Gi-jo answers with a small smile, asking Lee to take good care of his fellow Korean. Lee firmly tells Gi-jo that nationality doesn't matter in ARC, that respect is earned through skill alone. Nervously, Gi-jo agrees. Lee dismisses him for the day. As he leaves, Gi-jo mutters insults under his breath, calling Lee uptight and even throwing in a Korean curse word. Andy overhears and repeats the word curiously, prompting Kasim to explain it's a Korean swear he picked up from a drama. An hour earlier, Squad 5 had faced Squad 1 in their Capture the Flag match. Suddenly, the dome above began closing, plunging the field into total darkness. Seeing this, Jose complained that it was an unfair trick designed to make them lose. But Lee stayed calm, reminding them that both sides faced the same conditions. He instructed everyone to wait until their eyes adjusted, then laid out their roles. Nuth's team would take the lead. Jose's team would serve as support, while Lee, Gi-jo, and Kuro would strike from the side. Lee also warned them not to underestimate Squad 5 despite Dimitri's absence, stressing that they must give their all to secure victory. 10 minutes earlier, the lead team had already been called in to begin the match, followed shortly by the support team. And 5 minutes later, Lee's squad also made their entrance. They advanced quickly toward their objective and were already close to reaching the flag. That was when Nuth spotted something off. Squad 5 had been completely eliminated. He noticed a lone figure still standing near the flag, clearly the last opponent remaining. Dizio grew annoyed, questioning if that person had just stood idle while their whole squad got wiped out. Before the group could react further, Kuro suddenly shouted a warning. In an instant, the mass fighter used teleportation. That forced Lee to shove aside his shock and sharpen his focus. Gijo doubted whether they could even get close enough to land a strike, but he still charged straight at the skeleton-masked opponent. The masked figure flipped effortlessly and dodged the attack. What's worse, he countered by striking Gijo from behind. Gijo collapsed onto the ground. The tension rose sharply as whispers spread about the eerie skeleton mask. Some began to speculate that the fighter might actually be the infamous Silence, a name clouded in dark rumors. They recalled that during training, Silence had suffered central nervous system damage, losing the ability to speak. Yet after that incident, his combat skills advanced at a staggering rate and he became a subject of experiments. Shock spread when they realized he was a level 3 class, far above theirs, and it was against the rules for him to appear in a level 2 match. Even so, Lee refused to back down, standing firm. He was determined not to lose to the masked fighter, no matter who he turned out to be. In the middle of the clash, Nuth recognized the truth. The masked figure really was Silence, a fighter operating on a completely different level than any of the level 2s. Judging by his overwhelming strength, Nuth saw no chance of victory and wondered how Han Lee would respond. Lee knew that if he failed to block the next strike, the fight would end instantly, but he would not surrender. He quickly analyzed the situation, recalling that Silence's teleport covered about 15 meters at once. Taking into account the energy it consumed, Lee reasoned that he could probably only use it twice in succession. And besides, the real win condition wasn't defeating Silence, it was securing the flag. Lee resolved that if he could interrupt Silence even for a moment, he could snatch victory. He also noted the perfect timing to strike right when Silence activated his ability, because the surroundings blurred for a split second. Counting to 3, Lee lunged forward with his weapon in hand. At the same time, Silence charged in, ready to attack. Lee swung, knocking Silence's locket high into the air. But immediately after, Lee hit the ground, while Silence towered above him. His weapon was drawn and poised to finish the attack. Just before the blow could land, Lee slipped out from underneath, breaking Silence's focus. Taking that chance, Lee rushed to the flag and pointed out that regaining focus in only 3 seconds was impressive. But that small window was all he needed to secure the flag. With that, Han Lee declared victory over Skeleton Mask. The crowd erupted in shock that Han Lee had beaten a level 3, with some regretting not joining Squad 13. The scene then shifted to Kuro, who was crouching down to feed a cat, gently petting it and remembering a similar cat back near the orphanage. Han Lee also recalled those days when he had no friends, felt out of place, and failed at almost everything. But now, he had found something he excelled at and he had friends standing by him. From afar, Gijo spotted him and ridiculed him for talking to a cat, calling him pathetic and claiming his level must be low. After that, Gijo walked up, greeting Kuro and saying he wanted to discuss something on their day off. He explained that their squad currently lacked a vice leader and he wished to volunteer, asking Kuro for his support. The cat rubbed up against Gijo. Annoyed, Gijo complained that the animal was dirtying his clothes and angrily swung his leg to kick it. The cat bolted away. Watching this, Kuro stepped forward, his anger plain. Gijo was shocked and frightened by his reaction. Kuro warned him never to repeat something like that again. Hearing his tone, Gijo trembled, quickly agreed, and backed off. Without hesitation, Kuro rushed after the cat. Meanwhile, Dmitri spoke with a serious expression, convinced Han Lee wasn't here for fun, and asked what brought him. Lee replied that he could only speculate, since it seemed Ark was hiding something, but seeing it for himself made things clearer. Then Lee revealed that the one who injured Dmitri had been a level 3. Dmitri confirmed it was his former squad leader and admitted that level 3 fighters were on an entirely different scale. He said he couldn't even make a move before being defeated. Letting out a weary sigh, Lee noticed this was the first time he'd ever seen Dmitri so discouraged. Dmitri added that the man hadn't seemed like himself, almost as if he'd gone mad. Lee then considered it might be tied to level 3 activities, explaining further that ARC had very few level 3 facilities and encountering one was extremely rare. He also explained that training up to level 2 was more than enough, which meant they would likely face actual combat before ever reaching level 3. Dmitri then wondered what truly happened when someone advanced that far. Elsewhere, Kuro finally found the cat again. He gently picked it up, his eyes wet as he apologized and promised to bring more snacks next time. Suddenly, a mechanical-looking man appeared before him, leaving Kuro frozen in shock. When he heard the voice, Kuro quickly realized it belonged to Sergeant Red. Red paused for a moment, almost not recognizing Kuro because of how much he had changed. They were now standing inside the Ark Development Center. Red casually remarked that Kuro had wandered much farther than he should have, assuring him that a car would soon come to take him back to his dorm. While they waited, Sergeant Red calmly offered him a drink. Gathering his nerve, Kuro cautiously asked if Red was angry at him. Red shook his head and said there was no reason to be upset. The second-generation psycho frame Kuro had glimpsed would soon be revealed publicly anyway, and since level 2 soldiers like him couldn't freely leave Ark, learning about it early didn't matter much. Hearing that, Kuro reflected on their reality. The reinforced bodies they were given tied them to Ark until they were unfit for battle, treated as nothing more than assets of the organization. Red agreed with that thought. He added bluntly that anyone who chose to get angry over such trivial things simply had terrible personalities and could be dismissed as lunatics. During the conversation, an elderly man entered. He asked Red how the test went, and Red replied that the results were as expected, showing excellent response to psychic abilities. However, Red recommended cutting down on the amount of dragon material used in the internal system. He further noted that, unlike the first generation, the new models could manifest psychic power as naturally as breathing. The old man then introduced himself as Charlie Smith, Chief of Team 1, and Kuro greeted him. Red also recalled that Charlie was the legendary creator of the Psycho Frame. The first generation had been rushed and crude, but the second generation was far superior, built for their use. Though Red admitted it was still difficult for him to maneuver. Kuro, meanwhile, imagined having to wear the suit and use it in real combat. Not long after, Kuro left as his car had arrived. Later, Red asked what would become of the mainframe they had just tested. Harley answered that it would be disassembled and recycled because dragon material was scarce. After hearing this, Red suggested leaving it intact for now, since someone might eventually use it. The focus then shifted to Ark's strict schedule. Although the day began at 5 in the morning, Lee always woke up at 4 to record strategies, taking notes on his squad members' special abilities and other details. He also evaluated his own skills, realizing his psychic power was still below average and that he couldn't yet use the ultimate telekinesis technique his instructor Wei had mentioned. Han Li had discovered a unique ability of his own, absolute precision in applying psychic force. While Kuro and Simon could pulverize a pencil with telekinesis but couldn't write with one, Li could move objects with flawless accuracy. After realizing this, Li resolved to train harder and sharpen that precision before heading out for drills. Soon the group began their morning exercises. Their steps matched perfectly with the booming rhythm of the count, their voices steady and loud, pushing them into the flow of the day ahead. During the session, Dimitri called out to Han Li, drawing his attention. Li then asked about the dimensional crack Dimitri had seen the day before. Dimitri explained it wasn't particularly impressive, describing it as shiny and joking it would make a good date spot. That crack marked where Earth and another world had once been directly connected, and theories suggested it influenced the rise of psychers. Grossman reassured them that visiting it would be both safe and valuable, even though it was over a decade old and showed no more changes. He wondered if psychers felt anything unusual around it, and Dimitri confirmed they did, describing it as a dazed, unexplainable sensation. He told Lee he would get to feel it firsthand later that day. With that, the group resumed training with fresh energy, shouting their count in unison. Dimitri ran ahead of the rest. Shortly after, Han Li announced that everyone would assemble at the helipad at 10 in the morning and told them to eat, shower, and enjoy their free time until then. Jose, brimming with excitement, remarks that the whole thing almost feels like they are heading out on a school trip. With that, the morning session wraps up and the squad is officially dismissed. Not long after, Han Li crosses paths with John, the captain of Squad 10, who greets him warmly and invites him to join for breakfast. At the same time, Lee recalls Sergeant Red and remembers how Squad 10 had been one of the few groups strong enough to defeat them in the past. Furthermore, Lee admits that he has picked up a great deal by studying John's tactics and had always wanted the chance to speak with him directly, though John humbly insists he is nothing compared to Lee. Later, they make their way to the helipad where multiple helicopters stand ready. Their destination is Sinuijuju, one of the 6 original sites where dimensional gates opened during the first invasion. When dragon troops poured out in Sinuiju, they divided into 2 groups, one moving toward Korea, the other advancing into China. North Korea tried to counter with nuclear strikes, but they were useless. The northern lands of South Korea were reduced to wastelands of death. The North Korean regime collapsed, driving its people across the truce line. South Korea was forced to accept waves of refugees while still fighting off the invasion, and to this day the nation has never fully recovered from the social and financial collapse that followed. Awesome realizes that this is the Republic of South Korea, the homeland of both Han Li and Gijo. At last, they arrive in Sinuiju and close in on the dimensional crack. The helicopter's rear hatch lowers open. A heavy feeling spreads through the group. Lee feels as though he is about to be swallowed whole. Quime suddenly looks completely drained. Uro mutters that this place is awful, while Jose just wants to go back, wash off, and collapse into sleep. Lee notices nearby, Unit 4 Squad 10 is flying alongside their formation. Then, his eyes catch a massive explosion erupting in the distance. A sudden, blinding flash streaks across the sky. In shock, Lee realizes Squad 10 has been wiped out completely. His thoughts spiral in disbelief. He had only spoken to John for the very first time earlier that morning, and now, in an instant, John and his entire squad were gone. Urgent voices break through his daze, someone shouting his name repeatedly, hammering in that this is an emergency. The command is crystal clear. They must skydive now. The aircraft is spiraling down fast. Backup has been requested, but time is gone. They have to move immediately. Lee pulls himself together and rallies his squad, giving firm instructions to get ready. The standing order is once they land, they must regroup immediately and wait for rescue. If their instructor fails to link up with them, then Lee will assume command. Without a second thought, they line up and one by one leap into the open sky. Moments later, a thunderous blast swallows the aircraft behind them, scattering fire and debris across the clouds. When Lee's boots finally hit the ground, he gasps for air, the weight of the disaster pressing down on him. He forces himself to steady his nerves. He reminds himself to keep calm. This is exactly the kind of crisis their relentless training was meant to prepare them for. Yet his mind zeroes in on the fact that others out there might be injured, terrified, or unable to move. His first priority is clear. He must find them. Spotting smoke in the distance, Lee decides to head toward it. At first, he assumes it must be the wreckage of the downed aircraft, but another thought strikes him. Perhaps it's a signal from Jose. Gripping the knife he always carries, Lee presses forward. He scans the area carefully with each step. Suddenly, from between the trees, Gijo emerges. Gijo explains that while skydiving, he kept watching the aircraft and guessed Lee would be the last to jump. In situations like this, he says, regrouping with the squad leader always comes first. Lee, quietly impressed, realizes Gijo has sharper instincts than he had thought. Without hesitation, he urges him to move quickly so they can reunite with the rest as soon as possible. They set off, snapping twigs and leaving dagger marks to make sure they won't lose their trail. As they move, Han Lee brings up something further. He points out that this is Unit 2's zone and suspects that Squad 8 had been aboard the destroyed aircraft. The idea unsettles Gijo, who remarks that if they hadn't escaped, they too would have perished in the same way. Before long, they stumble across lifeless bodies. Gijo's face grows uneasy. He wonders aloud if Lee feels nothing at all. Lee calmly answers that this is hardly the first time they have seen corpses, reminding him that people at Ark die from time to time. Gijo tries to argue back, but Lee cuts him off, telling him to move faster before more lives are lost. In the blink of an eye, he's gone ahead. Suddenly, a werewolf bursts into view. Lee instantly realizes that there is something valuable inside the fallen aircraft, but they cannot ignore the beast. He decides he must be the one to hold it off. He warns Gijo that trying to run would be suicide. The creature is far too fast. Their only option is to kill it here and now. In a flash, a long tentacle whips out. It's the tail, coiling tightly around Lee's arm. Lee shouts at Gijo to move. Without hesitation, Gijo bolts, heart racing. Gijo curses under his breath, torn between the instinct to keep running and the crushing fear threatening to overwhelm him. Meanwhile, Lee is still fighting, slashing hard and severing the werewolf's tail with his knife. He shouts again for Gijo to get inside. The werewolf lunges immediately for another strike, but Lee dodges out of the way. At the entrance, Gijo hesitates, thinking that if they keep fighting like this, both of them will die. For a fleeting moment, a dark thought flickers. If he used Lee as bait, he could escape alive. But then, Gijo smacks himself across the face in fury. He refuses to betray his comrade. The situation turns desperate. The R2 rifle has no bullets left. Steeling himself, Gijo decides to grab whatever weapon he can, convinced that if it's Lee, he will be able to adapt to his moves. At the same time, Lee realizes in horror that the tentacle he severed has already regenerated. The werewolf seizes him in both arms, preparing a final strike. Just then, Gijo charges in, armed with a weapon and cloth wrapped around his arm. He apologizes for being late, but moves forward with faith that Lee will read his actions and respond. The werewolf wheels toward Gijo, ready to attack. Its focus sharpens on Gijo, but at that moment, Lee appears from behind and drives his long knife deep into the creature's body. Gasping for air, still trembling, Gijo wonders aloud if the monster is finally dead. Lee confirms it is and praises his effort. Still, Gijo feels as if every bone in his body is breaking. Elsewhere, word spreads that the Ark rescue team will soon arrive. Lee's group gathers around a small fire, letting the smoke trail upward as a signal to guide them back. Oro voices his trust in Lee, confident that as long as their leader is around, they will find a way to survive. Jose agrees, adding that Lee has always made the right calls, and their faith in him is clear. After all, his skill has been proven many times in past competitions. The tense atmosphere shifts when Kuro suddenly spots movement in the distance. They expect it to be their leader returning. But instead, it is Squad 9 who appears. Counting quickly, the group sees 6 members, and someone asks if they skydived and got separated. One of the newcomers explains that they had been ambushed. Their instructor and squad leader were both killed, and they barely escaped with their lives. Before long, Lee and Gijo return, joining the group. The survivors recount how they encountered 3 hunter-class creatures. With no weapons or supplies, fear begins spreading through the squads as they wonder if they are doomed. Stepping forward, Lee urges everyone to stay calm. He explains his plan. Since the rescue team will take at least 5 hours to reach them, they must build a fort and hold out until reinforcements arrive. 2 hours pass before all preparations are finally completed. Someone worries aloud that the brightness of their setup might draw attention, but Lee points out that werewolves have extraordinary senses of sight and smell anyway, so hiding would change nothing. Now, all they can do is wait. As the others keep working, Nuth quietly approaches Lee. He voices his concern, asking if the rescue team will be in danger should that strange ray of light strike again, and whether they even understand the true situation here. Lee responds firmly. He tells him that such questions can wait until they survive the night, urging him to focus only on the plan. Nuth looks at him knowingly, realizing Lee is well aware of the risk. Nuth reflects that real combat is far harsher than any of their competitions, making their past trials seem like little more than games. The heavy mood is suddenly broken when someone shouts Kuro's name in awe, impressed by his skills, but before the moment can settle, a warning rings out. An enemy is approaching from behind. The spear team quickly takes their stance, ready to launch. Lee calls Nuth to action. He tells him that throwing spears to drive the enemy back will be far more effective than holding them in reserve. In unison, all members hurl their weapons. Seizing the moment, Lee and Nuth launch their own offensive. The monster charges at Nuth, forcing Lee to cry out his name in alarm. Wounded, Nuth urges Lee not to worry about him. Immediately after, Lee turns to Kuro for intel. Kuro reports 2 more enemies positioned straight ahead at 12 o'clock. Lee then orders Jose to ignite the barricade. A sudden burst of flames stops the monsters right where they stand. Without hesitation, Lee commands his squad to target the closest one first. They attack in unison and manage to bring it down. That leaves only a single beast remaining. The last creature deflects a spear with its back, showing it isn't completely brainless. Lee quickly realizes it might just be stalling, waiting until they run out of weapons. He calls Gijo to his side, intending to pry the monster's jaws open and strike. Gijo charges with fierce determination, but Kuro suddenly shouts for him to watch out. The monster lunges, but only manages to shred Gijo's clothes. By sheer luck, it spares him from a real wound. Then, before anyone can react, an arrow suddenly streaks through the air straight at Gijo and Lee instantly cries out his name, realizing someone else has launched an attack. Kuro quickly apologizes, saying that being struck by an arrow is far better than being torn apart by werewolves. Lee immediately understands if arrows are involved, then the Ilu hunters must be here. Without delay, he orders Kuro to track them down. The moment has come to unleash his last hidden card, the 3 members of the surprise assault team. Lee explains that the plan is simple. Once the Ilu hunters think his squad has spent all their strength and exhausted every trick, that is when the hidden team will strike. He instructs them to channel their telekinetic powers, using wooden boards as flying platforms to close in from the air. Once Kuro spots the hunters, he will guide them directly to the targets. Speed is everything. They must hit before the enemy can react and raise defenses. Every single hunter has to be eliminated. But Kuro looks drained, his voice shaky as he admits his strength is gone. Every tactic they prepared has already been used, and if any more enemies show up, retreat will be their only choice. Suddenly, Han Lee notices more monsters rushing in. He realizes immediately that the werewolves are trying to surround them from every direction. That means there must be a commander giving the orders. Soon after, he identifies the leader, White Fang, a far smarter and deadlier breed of werewolf. A heavy weight of despair presses down on him, threatening to slow his movements. But when he looks up, he spots the distant silhouettes of the rescue squad descending from the sky. His resolve flares again. There's still hope. Lee rallies his squad, urging everyone to grab their spears. They just need to hold on a little longer. Hearing this, Kuro forces himself past exhaustion. He clutches his weapon tightly as the enemy charges in. The rescue team bursts onto the battlefield. Their arrival marked by a thunderous crash. Clad in protective, specially coated suits, they step forward, stunned that Lee's squad has even survived this long. The scene shifts to the aftermath. Jose looks at the survivors, calling it nothing short of a miracle. Nuth, holding his injured arm, agrees. Half of their people died that day, yet somehow they are still standing. Jose brings up the psycho frame, amazed at how easily it sliced through werewolves, when before they could barely kill even one. Even though the situation was terrifying, the group cheers loudly, overjoyed simply to be alive. While they celebrate, Lee stays quiet, lost in thought. Ever since their return from the dimensional crack, petty fights and rivalries between squads feel meaningless. Out of nowhere, Kato approaches Lee, admitting that he once hated him but is now just glad he's alive. Even Kato confesses he isn't prepared to kill or to watch others die. But now, he finally understands who their real enemies are. Hearing this, Lee comes to the same realization. Their enemies are nothing like them, and if they want to survive, they must grow much stronger. An emergency meeting is called. In silence, the man in the skeleton mask slams his fist into the wall in frustration. Lee is startled by the damage and thinks about how he barely managed to repair it for now. But breaking through a door like that is sheer madness. Han Lee wonders aloud who even called this meeting and asks, only for Silence to tell him it was Sergeant Red and to quit bothering him. Quietly, Lee questions if Silence still holds a grudge from their past rivalry. When Lee arrives, he sees Del Simon already waiting there. Sergeant Red snaps at Han Lee, telling him to stop standing around like a dog that lost its bone and to sit down, since this meeting will last a while. Soon, Alexander explains that nearly a quarter of the Level 2s died in this incident, and it wasn't even a war, just training. The commander in charge must be held accountable and the truth exposed. Alexander Recker, ARC's chief of staff, announces that the Supreme Council will decide how to respond to this devastating loss. Head instructor Grossman has already been assigned full responsibility for what happened. The council begins dissecting the situation. Reviewing footage from the aircraft's dashcam, the attack appears to have been orchestrated by the Elu mages. Members note that until now, their enemies were limited to werewolves and lesser fighters like Elu hunters. For Elu mages to attack openly and reveal themselves like this is something that hasn't happened since the war. Some point out that Elu mages are also capable of opening gates, which might mean the next war will arrive sooner than prophecy foretold. A suggestion arises to awaken the Oracle. Sergeant Red adds that the only team code letter left is W and tells them to decide between white or whiskey. Silence votes for white, another agrees, and Lee follows along. But Red settles on whiskey as their codename. With that decided, he moves on to outlining their objectives. Alexander admits the Oracle would be useful now, but insists there may come a time when its guidance will be even more crucial. He then asks for Sergeant Red's opinion. Red advises postponing the Oracle's awakening for now, but requests authorization to form a team. When Alexander presses him for details, Red lays out his plan: capture the Elu mages alive in Shinweiju and extract information through interrogation, believing this is the fastest path to understanding the enemy. The group is soon greeted by Chief Engineer Siegfried Schumacher, known as Octo, who welcomes the Level 2 trainees. He instructs them to pick their standard dragon weapons first, reminding them that each one has a serial number and must be returned later. The protagonist inspects a spear and notices the unusual blade color, while Octo explains that dragon-forged weapons store the user's psychic energy. Simon asks if other weapon shapes exist, like a thinner, longer blade, but the doctor tells him that custom weapons can only be requested at level 3 and can't be made overnight. Moving on, Octo hands out the next piece of gear, which our hero instantly recognizes as an airbit. He explains it's the smallest and lightest version, stripped of all functions except personal maneuvering. After that, he wishes them luck and sends them off. Their mission begins at the Shinweiju dimensional crack. The squad advances carefully to avoid bombardment, stepping out from the safe zone toward the operational sector. The operation, named Catching Wizard, has one clear goal: capture the Elu mage alive and return. Their formation is arranged: Silence in front, followed by John, with Han Lee and Simon at the rear. The protagonist wonders why he was chosen at all when level 3s far stronger than him exist, but the sergeant admits that while others may outmatch him in raw combat, from a strategic angle, he is different. Red recalls how Lee once led a group that survived without gear while fighting minions, proving his leadership and adaptability. John adds that most who return from the dimensional crack suffer crippling trauma, yet Lee's ability to withstand such irrational battle conditions is remarkable, almost inhuman. At one point, Red even questioned whether Lee might be a psychopath because of his mental resilience. The only thing he lacks is real combat experience, which is exactly why Red chose both him and Simon for this mission. The protagonist understands this as they press deeper into hostile territory. Simon trails silently at the back, his thoughts seethed with jealousy. He refuses to believe Han Lee's reputation for defeating a level 3, and with every bit of praise Silence receives, Simon only grows more determined. He vows to prove himself on this mission, to show everyone who truly deserves recognition. Red soon calls for a short break, announcing that they'll split into 2 squads. Silence is paired with Lee, while Simon is assigned to Red. As they approach a dense forest, the protagonist's thoughts drift to his missing squad mates, those who never came back from a past mission. Deep down, he knows the chances are slim, but maybe this place still holds answers. Lee then asks Silence to remove his helmet for a moment, but Silence refuses, saying he isn't feeling hot, so Han Lee doesn't push the matter any further. Moments later, Red informs the squad that from this point onward, standard comms will fail and they'll be switching to a localized squad network. As they move ahead, they suddenly spot 2 Elu scouts approaching. Red immediately signals for everyone to hold fire. He then orders Silence to handle them. In the blink of an eye, Silence wipes out the targets with ease. Red mutters about his incredible efficiency, noting the odd way he uses preloaded macro messages. Lee, watching closely, can't help but compare Silence's technique to some sort of cheat code built for assassins. But before Silence can finish the job, Han Lee quickly stops him. Instead, Lee suggests they tail the scouts rather than kill them outright. He reasons that the scouts' relaxed movements and their direction toward the crack suggest they're returning from a recon mission, and if so, following them could lead straight to valuable intel. Red praises Lee's sharp instincts and orders Silence to shadow the scouts at a distance. Meanwhile, Simon is lost in his own head, obsessed with the idea of outshining Han Li and struggling to hold back the urge to act. Soon they finally spot the Elu mage and Red points at the jewel fixed on the staff, identifying it as a psychic crystal. He explains that it can store an enormous amount of psychic energy and suspects it was the weapon used to shoot down their aircraft. Red sizes up the enemy force, 1 mage and 6 warriors, 7 in total. He notes they're lucky no werewolves are with them. Calling everyone together, Red links up with Silence and announces the start of Operation Catching Wizard. The strategy is clear. Silence will capture the mage before it can teleport, while the rest of the squad takes down the Elu warriors. With zero room for mistakes, they steel themselves to move in. Lee notices how unusually bright the area feels. Then his eyes catch strange objects scattered in front of the altar. His gaze shifts, and his blood runs cold when he sees familiar bodies on the ground. Lee yells Qasim's name in shock. He spots both Qasim and Domingo lying lifeless, his voice cracking as he calls out to them. The trainer rushes over, sensing something is wrong. At the same time, psychic energy begins to pour out of Han Li, and the trainer realizes this surge could put everyone at risk. Because the Elu can sense psychic energy, if Li doesn't get control, their cover is blown. This is critical. The senior has no choice and discreetly signals a coded order through static. Whiskey Squad instantly receive the retreat command. The squad hesitates, confused by the sudden decision, but Sergeant Red keeps his focus, determined to handle Han Li himself. For now, Lee's energy output isn't strong enough to fully expose them, so long as it doesn't grow. Suddenly, the yellow mage locks on to Lee's energy signature. He launches a sudden strike, but Red reacts instantly. Counterattacking, Red shields Han Li from the blow. Realizing what's happening, Lee snaps back to his senses and coordinates with Red to push the mage back. In the chaos, Lee mutters a curse under his breath. The trainer calls out, asking if he's back under control. He also reminds him that if Red goes down, Lee is the acting commander. Without hesitation, Lee orders a retreat and asks for covering fire. He slings Red's weight over his shoulder and pushes forward, while Silence throws himself into combat to buy them time. Simon joins in as well. He fires shot after shot with deadly precision. Muttering in frustration, Simon feels like he came in too late and wonders if this might already be the end. Watching how Lee stands against the mage, Simon questions how he could possibly fight such a dangerous opponent. Eventually, the enemy calls off the chase. Lee blames himself, convinced his mistake ruined the mission. Simon cuts him off, saying tighter surveillance makes continuing impossible anyway, and retreat is the only option. But Lee refuses, insisting they stick to the plan. Silence suddenly snaps and slaps Lee hard across the face. Simon immediately steps in, telling Silence to calm down. He reminds him that Lee is their commander right now, warning that if Silence keeps dragging them back, he won't stay quiet about it. Simon then glares at Lee, saying this whole mess started because of him, and if he dares put together another half-baked plan, Simon will beat him bloody before forcing a retreat. Still, he agrees to hear the plan first, admitting that Lee is the smartest of all the level 2s. And Lee tells Silence to drop his temper and listen. Despite how bad things look, he insists the situation isn't hopeless. Simon is surprised, but Lee stands by it. He explains that the earlier danger was tied to the Elu mage's psychic fire and his ability to teleport. Now, both threats are off the table. Simon agrees about the fire, noting the mage already used his last blast, but he presses Lee. How can he be sure teleportation is no longer possible? Lee answers that for 10 years the Elu have lived in hiding, always cautious and cunning. Yet now, even with their lives in danger, they still aren't breaking formation. Instead, the mage used the last of the crystal's energy to attack and then called the warriors back to defend him, rather than pursuing their squad. Lee concludes that if teleportation were still possible, the mage would have already escaped, so he must be trapped in that spot. On top of that, the overwhelming energy and glare from the crack will make it difficult for the mage to sense psychic signatures or see clearly. Simon warns that the same danger applies to Lee. The crack's pressure is brutal. Controlling the air bit under such strain could be fatal. One slip could mean death, but Lee insists he trusts his psychic control. He clarifies this isn't about making up for his earlier mistake. It's because he's the one with the highest chance of success. Simon tells Silence that Lee must have seen one of his own squad mates among the corpses. He admits Lee seems cold, but no one could feel nothing after that, not if they're human. Simon respects Lee for still forming a plan and analyzing the enemy even while everything fell apart, realizing why Squad 13 trusts him without question. Meanwhile, Lee arrives right on time. He tosses their backup gear onto the ground and sends helmets tumbling into the crack. Nervously, he activates the airbit, fully aware that failure here means death for everyone. At the same moment, the others glance at their bracelets. Their 15 minutes are up. The plan has officially begun. Lee's eyes sharpen with determination. He throws out 2 air bits ahead of him and leaps straight into the crack. With quick thinking, he lands on one of the air bits mid-air. At the same time, the duo charges toward the Elu mage who is caught off guard, shocked by their sudden presence. More Elu warriors appear, making Simon nervous, wondering if the mage summoned them all for protection. But now isn't the time to dwell. He forces himself to stay focused. Silence already breaks through the first 2 Elu warriors and moves in on a third. That one gets back up, but Simon's bullets find their mark. Silence takes the opening, swinging his weapon and cutting into the warrior from behind. As the body drops, the two exchange a quick look before jumping back into the fight. Simon keeps firing at enemies and Silence dashes forward to engage again. A bullet whistles past his face, striking down another Elu. They glance at each other, confirming they're both fine. Simon silently prays that whatever Lee is planning works because he refuses to let his first mission end in failure. Meanwhile, Lee is flying on the air bits high above the crack. But suddenly, that familiar dread creeps over him again. It begins. His nerves spike, and he grits his teeth, certain that what he feels is dragon fear. From deep inside the crack, it's as if the dragon itself is staring at him. But Lee tells himself it's only an illusion. He cannot falter, even as the vision shows the dragon opening its mouth to devour him. Refusing to surrender, Lee bites down hard on his thumb until blood spills. The trembling vanishes. With that, he hurls himself straight into the dragon's jaws. Meanwhile, Simon and Silence are holding strong. Only 2 Elu warriors remain now, guarding the mage. Simon clearly understands that these 2 warriors are the sole protectors of the mage, which is why they will not recklessly charge forward to strike. Because of this, Simon steadies his weapon and carefully takes aim. The warriors, noticing his movements, quickly raise their hands. They immediately conjure psychic shields, already anticipating the direction of a shot. Yet in that very instant, both Simon and Silence catch sight of a shadowy figure moving behind the Elu mage. Before the mage can even process what is happening, Lee seizes him from behind, pressing a syringe in his grip, stating calmly that no shield had been placed at the back. The Elu warriors whip around at once, desperate to rush in and save their mage, but they are stopped mid-motion because Silence intercepts them. In a single decisive swing, he severs their heads. At that moment, Lee drives the needle into the mage's neck. He starts injecting the sedative, but anxiety grips him when the liquid seems too slow to take effect, raising the terrifying thought that the mage might teleport away at any second. Suddenly, the mage's body begins to break apart, dissolving into fragments, which makes Lee even more unsettled as he silently hopes the injection works. Out of nowhere, a radiant light bursts into view. When Lee glances down at his lap, the mage collapses unconscious, its form transforming into an alien-like creature. With that, the mission is deemed complete and the entire squad is brought back to Ark. John is soon hospitalized, resting in bed while typing his mission report on a laptop. Lee stays by his side, watching in silence, worry written on his face. Without pausing his work, John tells Lee to stop looking at him like a frightened puppy. He reassures him that prosthetics can easily take care of the injury and insists he stop apologizing, joking instead that he can finally apply for retirement disability checks. Since Lee remains quiet, John points out that pressing forward with the mission was the right choice, because if they had turned back, he would have held resentment toward Lee for making them lose everything for nothing. Besides, his report is already complete. He adds that the rest of the details will be drawn out of the captured mage. Lee, still curious, wonders aloud if interrogation of creatures from another world is even possible, and that's when John explains Ark has a psyker who specializes in telepathy, the only one of his kind in the entire world. Just then, both of their eyes drift toward the door. Silene steps into the room. Using his bracelet, he quietly exchanges words with John. Sergeant Red cuts in with a playful jab, joking about him being light on his feet. Both he and Silence chuckle at the remark. Lee is taken aback, stunned, since this is the first time he's ever seen Silence laugh, and up until now, he had only spoken with John. Later, on their way back to campus, Silence apologizes to Lee for striking him earlier, admitting that in his place, he would have done the same. Even RMC concedes that Silence was right, as Lee's recklessness had put everyone in danger. Still, Silence admits Lee also saved them, and he now understands why John has faith in RMC. Both men agree on at least one thing. The trainer's guidance is meant for all of them, whether Lee personally likes it or not. Soon after, they split paths. As Lee heads off on his own, our protagonist receives a sudden message typed in by Silence on his bracelet. A notification pings. Lee grins and turns to glance at Silence, but Silence is already walking away, flipping him the middle finger. Meanwhile, Supreme Council inspectors have arrived in the country, visiting Ark to receive updates on the latest events. Alexander Lacour, ARC's chief officer, orders his ARC soldiers to escort them all to the meeting chamber. Each inspector is handed a bracelet with a map function in case they lose their way. Among them, Inspector James Rue separates from the group. Even when an ARC officer tries to direct him to his vehicle, James declines, saying he prefers to walk at his own pace, while the ARC officer resigns himself to the fact that James will be troublesome. James, for his part, is already convinced that anything they present will only be surface level. Before leaving, he casually asks about Lee. Later, James surprises Squad 13 with a heap of snacks. Much to their excitement, the squad members are thrilled with the treats. While the others cheer, Lee remains completely unfazed. He tells James they are in the middle of training, prompting James to apologize, promising not to interfere and choosing instead to watch quietly from a distance. As Lee orders the squad to grab their gear and head for the shooting range, James suddenly realizes this is the very Lee he had asked about. Riding past the training grounds, James reflects that there are no notable records on Lee. His reputation only came from an undefeated streak among the squads and, of course, the infamous tear incident. He feels mildly disappointed that there haven't been any matches lately. But not long after, James spots Squad 13 heading toward the gym. Once inside, Lee challenges Kuro to spar with him. James quietly observes from the sidelines. Both of them take up their weapons. Lee stands firm, while Kuro trembles with fear, baffled at why Lee would suddenly demand a spar. But Lee knows exactly what he is doing. During the dimensional tear, he had realized that in real combat, psychic powers alone are not enough. Kuro needs to at least reach average competence in every other combat field. With his enhanced body, it all comes down to mindset. So, without hesitation, our protagonist charges straight at him. Kuro dodges every strike, but he is already struggling to catch his breath. Lee explains that relying on defense alone will never bring victory, not when facing opponents with foresight. He urges Kuro to strike back, though Kuro hesitates. Finally, Kuro shuts his eyes. He lunges forward with his weapon, clatters onto the floor. Because of this, Lee instructs him to attack with open eyes and to tighten his grip on the spear. Now Lee demands Kuro to come at him with everything he's got. The rest of the squad is stunned at the intensity. Lee declares that when standing before Kuro, he himself will give it everything, so Kuro must do the same in return. Nuth and Jose whisper that it's impossible to predict the outcome if psychic powers are included, since Lee excels physically while Kuro is unmatched in psychic ability. Lee smirks, teasing Kuro and hinting that he's just too scared to strike him. Kuro lowers his gaze, still unsure why Lee is forcing this, but deep down, he knows there must be a reason. Choosing to trust Lee, he decides to follow through. Kuro unleashes his psychic power, summoning every weapon in the gym as a powerful aura surrounds him, his eyes glowing bright. At that time, Lee pays a visit to Wei, sitting in his office drinking oolong tea. The taste makes him literally drool, and seeing him act his age makes Wei grin. But soon after, Lee explains Kuro's problem. He hesitates too much and lacks aggression, and Lee fears this will cost Kuro his life. Wei explains that people's emotional attachment shifts depending on the kind of weapon they wield, which affects their resistance to attacking. Even trained soldiers may hesitate to kill with their bare hands. Yet civilians can sometimes kill without hesitation if it's through something like a remote bomb. This might be the very reason Kuro struggles. It feels like nothing more than following an order. What he needs is proper motivation, just like on that deserted island. When he had put his faith in Lee, back at the training ground, Kuro has every weapon floating around him. Nuth and Jose are nervous because the guy is completely unpredictable. Even James is amazed, witnessing firsthand the raw power of a psyker. Meanwhile, Lee smirks with satisfaction since this is exactly the kind of behavior he expects from Kuro, the moment he sees him take his attacking stance. Jose and Nuth grow even more uneasy, knowing Kuro can predict Lee's every movement. Dodging won't allow him to close in. Kuro now hurls a spear using telekinesis, but Lee instantly recognizes it carries no more force than a weapon he could throw with his bare hands, so he catches it mid-flight. Tossing the spear aside, Lee challenges him, asking if he plans to waste time throwing them one by one, because at this pace they'll be here all day. He insists that Kuro must attack him directly with his hands. Having said that, Lee declares that he is charging in again to attack. As he rushes, Kuro launches several spears at once, yet Lee skillfully parries each strike. Pushing forward, Lee warns that the number of spears is dwindling. At that moment, he thrusts with his own spear, but, terrified, Kuro throws every last spear at him in desperation. In response, Lee shrugs off his jacket. With telekinesis, he manipulates it as a shield, dodging the incoming barrage and deflecting the rest. Nuth and Jose are floored, and Nuth yells at Kuro to extend his spear. Kuro, now furious, grips his spear tightly and charges at Lee. He aims for Lee's torso, but Lee shatters it in an instant and Lee flicks his thumb against Kuro's forehead. After that, he takes a deep breath, smiling as he praises Kuro for keeping his eyes open while striking. Tears begin to well up in Kuro's eyes, and he places his hand against his forehead, while Nuth and Jose leap around, dancing with excitement because the match turned out great. With a grin, Lee jokes that Kuro's only flaw is being far too soft-hearted. Right after, Lee asks why Kuro chose to aim at his torso, pointing out that sending those spears randomly would have been much more effective. Awkwardly, Kuro admits he didn't want to hit Lee in the face, though he was also impressed after seeing Lee use his jacket like that. Meanwhile, James has been watching the entire time, realizing the extent of Lee's abilities, already plotting to squeeze information from him about ARC's classified matters. Because of this, James steps forward and asks Lee to come with him for a quick talk. The sun is already dipping low as James and Lee step outside the ARC building. Lee double-checks if this is about the tear incident, reminding James that he already included everything he knew in the report. James casually offers him a soda and sits down on a nearby bench. He explains that what he really wants is to hear Lee's version firsthand. Patting the bench beside him, he insists Lee take a seat. James then activates his special ability, Super Reactions, which works by aligning with someone's actions so they unconsciously relax and reveal more. But when he tries it on Lee, nothing new comes out. Lee simply repeats what was already in the report. James notices how Lee's face never shifts, not even once, no matter how friendly James acts, and it hits him that Lee is sharper than he assumed. Eventually, Lee decides it's time to leave, giving James a respectful salute before walking off. As he heads away, Lee knows full well that James had been trying to make him slip, but Lee is under strict orders. Squad Whiskey's operations must remain secret at any cost. After Lee leaves, James immediately makes a call. He orders the person on the other side to keep constant tabs on Lee and to check whether he left ARC after the tear incident. Later on, all the second-year students are out jogging. Dmitri runs up alongside Lee. He points out the Russian inspector, who has been nothing but a constant annoyance for him. The inspector won't stop hounding him, demanding that Dmitri fight for his country once this war ends. Lee is baffled, since after the Dragon War ends, ARC itself will be dissolved, so who are they even supposed to fight? Hearing this, Dmitri reveals that once the dragons are dealt with, the big shots at the top are already planning to start a new war to rule the world. The weight of this news darkens Lee's face, and sweat trickles down his temple. Soon after, the next round of training begins. Jose squares off against Kuro, with both of them trading blows as they spar. Meanwhile, Lee observes them silently, lost in heavy thoughts. Lowering his gaze, he struggles to accept the reality that even after they defeat the monsters, true peace will never arrive. Instead, another war will simply take its place. Suddenly, the training hall doors swing open. James steps inside, smiling as he finally spots Lee. Everyone halts their practice as James recalls the latest intel he received. During the days right after the Sinweiju incident, Lee wasn't at IRC, meaning he must have been sent on a classified mission. Determined, James decides to confirm his suspicion, even if it means sounding openly threatening this time. With that, James strides up to Lee with his two bodyguards, exuding confidence. Just then, Squad 13 receives alerts on their bracelets. James's bold demeanor falters when he notices Jose, Nuth, and Guizhou glaring at him with hostility. In that instant, Lee twists James's arms behind his back, binding them tightly. Bodyguards quickly reach for their guns, but Kuro is faster, pulling the weapons toward himself with raw telekinesis. The force is so strong that the bodyguard's fingers snap from the pressure. At that moment, Lee declares that James will now remain under their protection. James is thrown into confusion, not understanding what's happening as he struggles against Lee's grip. Still, Lee urges James to cooperate, explaining that these are direct orders from higher up. Bewildered, James demands to know why, but before they can get into it further, a violent crash erupts, pieces of plaster raining down from the ceiling. Lee instantly announces they are under attack. His immediate command is for everyone to secure the area and protect the inspectors nearby. James is completely lost now, wondering if there's a traitor among the inspectors. Simultaneously, Lee assigns Jose to guard the inspector, while ordering Guizhou and Nuth to seize the guns. Concerned, Lee asks Kuro to confirm if their enemy is the LOU. After a pause, Kuro simply replies, "People." Following that, they seat the inspector and the bodyguards down on the ground while Lee distributes magazines, each with 60 rounds, giving 2 per person. Then Lee checks in with the other squads, asking how many inspectors and guards they each have. Squad 1 reports they have 4. Demetrius's squad has 2. Simon's group is protecting 6. Hearing this, James realizes that even the other squads are following Lee's lead, acknowledging him as a leader despite being only a second year. Lee then calculates the best terrain for their advantage and orders all squads to regroup at the 4th Battle Simulation Dome, reminding them to bring every piece of combat gear they have. Cautiously, Lee leaves the escort, 2 members flanking the inspector and 2 more covering the rear. Along the way, Lee presses James, asking if he knew about this enemy in advance, because when the alert came in, it seemed like James wasn't surprised at all. Still, Lee clarifies he doesn't think James is a spy. With a smirk, James finally reveals that their attackers are self-proclaimed pure humanists. At least, that's the name they use for themselves. Their entire ideology is based on exterminating psychers, whom they consider non-human. In short, they both fear and hate superhumans with extraordinary powers. Finding the logic absurd, Nuth shoots back that dragons will arrive in less than 3 years. Yet these lunatics are trying to kill the very people who could defend humanity. But James explains that they believe psychers are the reason the dragons invaded in the first place. In fact, they claim dragons wouldn't even exist here if psychers never appeared. James admits it's complete nonsense, since psychers only emerged after the gate itself appeared. Right then, a helicopter swoops toward the base, with an armed man, clearly a pure humanist, peering out and spotting the Ark building below. His face lights up with twisted excitement at the thought of wiping out the monsters blocking Providence's path. More helicopters close in right after. Ark's air defenses open fire. Blazing anti-air weapons rip through the skies, striking at the incoming crafts to protect the island. Several helicopters are shredded within seconds, tumbling down in flames. Chaos erupts across the island as Ark soldiers advance in tight formation, weapons at the ready. But a number of helicopters still manage to land successfully, allowing the pure humanists to pour out heavily armed and charging toward the Ark facility. On the other side, Lee's squad hears the bursts of gunfire, knowing their clash is only moments away. Suddenly, a deafening crash echoes, and they look up to see another hostile helicopter has gone down nearby. There's a high chance survivors crawled out of the wreckage. To confirm, Lee turns to Nuth, asking if he saw how many enemies were inside. Nervously, Nuth reports there were 4. The squad's choice to move through the shopping district, with its many places for cover, was to minimize combat and keep the inspector safe. Lowering his head, Lee looks his men in the eye and tells them to get ready. The boys are tense and afraid, but they know what comes next. They are about to face real killing. By now, Ark soldiers have already gunned down several pure humanists, but the fight is far from finished. Their commander, circling the helipad, rushes over to the corpse of one of his men. He grabs the fallen body and hoists it up as a makeshift shield, pushing forward. Using that cover, he opens fire on the Ark soldiers. 2 of them drop instantly, taken out. Raising his voice, the Purist commander roars that the Earth belongs to humans, not monsters like those sheltered within Ark. Hearing this, the members of Squad 13 glance, their own leader, waiting for his response. But James privately scoffs, convinced most of these boys will be useless. Fixing his eyes on Nuth, he suspects maybe only this one will amount to something, since the boy carries himself with confidence. At that moment, Lee calls Nuth's name and the 2 of them charge ahead together. Watching them, James admits that in terms of raw ability, these kids already surpass the Purists, who are nothing more than armed civilians. Yet what makes the Purists dangerous is their experience. They are far more accustomed to killing humans. At that exact moment, when nobody is paying attention, James slits free from the restraints binding his hands. Swiftly, Lee moves in front with Nuth trailing close behind. Leaning toward him, Lee asks if Nuth will really be alright. Knuth replies that he'll just imagine the Purists as deer, because if they don't kill them, then Ark itself will be destroyed. Hearing those words, painful memories resurface in Lee's mind, flashes of his time in ruined Seoul, South Korea. A younger Lee running desperately through the rain, fleeing from a man who kept. Someone shouts at Lee, demanding he stop. But Lee doesn't care about the weather or the noise around him. He keeps running, clutching the stolen bag of apples tightly in his hands. His breathing grows ragged, the endless sprint already taking its toll. Both he and the man chasing him begin to slow down. Yet Lee's escape comes to a halt when the railroad light suddenly turns red. The pedestrian barrier drops, and in that moment, the man grabs Lee by the hood, yanking him backward. Even with the train fast approaching, the man refuses to release his grip. Desperate to survive, Lee lashes out and kicks the man hard in the face. The impact throws Lee across the tracks, landing him on the other side. The man, however, has no time to react and is struck by the oncoming train. Horror floods Lee's face as he watches the gruesome scene. The apples he risks everything for now scattered across the ground mixed with torn remains of the man's body. This memory burns in Lee's mind as he and Nuth draw closer to the crashed helicopter nearby. But when it comes time to move forward, both of them freeze in place. Lee carefully pulls out an AirTag. He attaches it to a jacket and sends it sliding around the corner. The moment the purest humanists spot it, they open fire. Tracking the source of the shots, Nuth immediately pinpoints the Purist, who at that moment is staring at the jacket in confusion. Bullets tear through the jacket, leaving the enemy baffled. Seizing the opening, Nuth leaps from a window and fires into the enemy's back. The man screams in agony. The other Purist humanist, alerted by the sound, rushes toward the noise, but he is immediately shot in the head by Lee, who is already lying in wait. Lee remains hidden, unseen as his shot lands true. At that very moment, Nuth's body trembles. As the first Purist is still alive, clinging to life, Nuth knows he must finish the job. Yet with his eyes closed and teeth clenched, Nuth cannot bring himself to pull the trigger. The Purist stares back at him defiantly, daring Nuth to look him in the eye. When Nuth finally meets his gaze, he freezes. Overwhelmed, Nuth breaks and fires straight into the man, ending him once and for all. Shaken, Nuth goes rigid until Lee appears from behind, calling out his name to make sure he's alright. Without turning to look, Nuth insists he's fine. Meanwhile, the rest of the squad stays where they are with James and his 2 bodyguards. Jose holds his weapon steady, but Kuro trembles in fear, and James can't help but notice that this guy looks like he couldn't even squash a bug. What unsettles him more is that Kuro keeps staring behind them like he already senses something coming. Still, James feels slightly reassured once his restraints are removed. Shaking, Kuro mutters that they're coming. James stares at him in confusion, uncertain what he means. Kuro grits his teeth, fully aware that they need to shoot soon. As James turns his head in the same direction Kuro has been watching, a purist humanist emerges with his gun raised and shouts for everyone to get down. Jose gasps in panic, spinning around, but James, acting fast, grabs the weapon straight from Kuro's hands. He fires and takes down the enemy. The attacker crashes to the ground, lifeless. Stunned, Kuro looks at his empty hands, realizing that just seconds ago he still had a weapon, while James is already scanning the area for more threats. Spotting another enemy in a window, Kuro tenses, but using his psychic ability, he summons a metal hatch out of nowhere, shielding James from the incoming attack. James takes advantage of the protection and counterattacks, killing the enemy cleanly. Once the area is clear, James asks if that was all. When Kuro confirms, James remarks that Kuro's aim is terrible, but his psychic abilities are impressive. As the dust settles, Nuth and Lee rush over to check on the group, making sure everyone is safe. The inspector tosses a machine gun to Kuro. Kuro raises his hands with a faint smile. Confident Lee and Nuth are smart enough to understand what just happened. Still, there's no time to dwell on it. They have to keep moving. At that same moment, an explosion rips through the area. A squad of purists stands at the shelter's gate, blowing it open so they can storm inside and target the children. Seeing the place empty, their commander sneers, realizing the rats have already fled. He orders his men to wipe them out regardless. Raising his weapon, the purist commander roars that the Arks are deceiving everyone, insisting the dragons are no longer a threat to their world. He claims the dragons have been gone for more than a decade. The Ark, he declares, is simply training psychers to secure domination. Their goal, he says, is to control every last human being through psychic power. With that speech, he leads his soldiers, proclaiming they will eliminate these people for the sake of humanity. Meanwhile, inside the 4th Battle Simulation Dome, Lee and his squad enter with James and the 2 bodyguards. There, they realize the other second years have gathered as well. They watch as the Russian inspector screams furiously at Simon for treating the inspector so harshly, but Simon grabs him by the collar without hesitation, threatening to kill him if he doesn't shut up, reminding him of why all this is happening in the first place. Eyes burning, Simon presses harder, snarling that because of the inspector's department and the traitor they brought with them, Simon and his team were forced to kill people. His eyes glow even brighter as he admits he has never felt such rage before. The Russian inspector trembles violently, breaking into a cold sweat. At that moment, Lee steps in, urging Simon to calm down, reminding him they are supposed to protect these inspectors, not kill them. Simon finally lets go. With a stiff nod, he steps aside. Jose watches in disbelief, amazed that Simon actually backed down just because Lee told him to. Pressing onward, they move into the first year's weapons training arena. There, Wei is fighting the purists, but he is badly wounded while the younger kids scream in terror. Panting, Wei stares at the fallen bodies of humanists around him. He grits his teeth, blood pouring from his wounds. With trembling hands, he raises his bracelet and calls out to Lee. Not long after, Lee and the others rush out of the dome, because Wei has warned him that the humanists are targeting the first years. Wei tells him plainly, the purists are headed straight for the shelter, and the only ones within range to stop them are the first years. He's counting on Lee. Remembering Wei's words, Lee realizes that aside from protecting the inspectors, they must also protect the freshmen. With only a couple of instructors at the shelters, the rest are first years, and if they arrive even 1 minute too late, it could mean the end. On their way inside, the purists cut down more of the instructors with ease, yet the commander grows irritated since the shelter's design is a confusing maze. To fix this, he contacts one of his squads, Easy, who reports finding a door. He checks with Alpha and Delta squads as well. Delta is still searching, while Alpha runs into Arkman, who open fire from behind as they approach the shelter. With Alpha stuck outside, Lee, together with his team, orders them all to fight head-on, insisting there's no time to hesitate. When Lee notices the enemies lack firearms, he turns to Simon, asking if he can handle blocking them. Simon answers with a firm, serious look, assuring Lee he can do more than that, then orders them to wait for his signal. Lee relays the plan to the others, telling everyone Simon will lead and they must stay behind him. As the Ark squad charges forward, Alpha squad unleashes gunfire, but Simon surges ahead, shielding himself with psychic power. He signals his allies while dodging into position. Then he unleashes a burst of immense energy. The wave is so strong the enemies can barely keep their eyes open. Alpha squad stares in confusion, unable to grasp what's happening. In that instant, Simon orders his squad to open fire. The purists are wiped out in a single strike, though one lies on the ground, bleeding heavily. Writhing in pain, the survivor calls them all monsters who must be eradicated. Nuth, furious, silences him with a bullet to the head, spitting back that he's the real monster. Lee rests a hand on Nuth's shoulder, urging him to calm down and reminding the squad there are still more enemies inside. Turning to the gathered fighters from the other squads, including Simon, Lee explains that this temporary unit was formed for a reason, and everyone here was chosen because they share certain key traits. Lee remembers the time he lost control of his emotions, and Sergeant John had to step in to save him. Because of that, John lost his leg, and Lee learned his lesson in the harshest way possible. He swore he would never repeat that mistake, and he would not allow his squad to fall into the same trap either. That is why he tells everyone to engrave one thing into their minds. From this moment on, no matter what happens, they must suppress every single emotion, because if they fail to do that, the whole squad will be at risk. Not too long ago, when the team was preparing near the shelter, the main character sketched a map right on the ground. Knowing they were already familiar with the terrain, he carefully marked out positions so each squad could move without confusion. Using the map as reference, he instructed the squad leaders to get their men into the assigned spots. Afterward, several groups split off to the sides, already discussing their strategies in detail. Dmitri halted for a moment, then walked up to Lee, calling his name and asking if he could head out on his own for a while, leaving the rest to his second-in-command. He explained he had something to confirm. Without pressing him with questions, the protagonist granted permission and let him go. Over at the psychiatry ward, Dmitri stepped inside, only to see countless bodies lying lifeless across the floor. His expression hardened instantly. Then he called out the name of the former squad leader of the 5th Squad, who was standing right in the center of the room. Dmitri demanded to know why he was there. He reminded the former leader that the man he was holding right now was a member of the ARC. With the captive in his grasp, the former squad leader retorted, asking if Dmitri truly believed ARC was ever on their side. He went on, saying that as third years they were sent into real missions. The former leader confessed that during those missions he experienced terror and helplessness beyond imagination. His instincts screamed that victory was impossible against those beings. It was the unmistakable fear of dragons. Letting go of the man, the former leader explained to Dmitri that to ARC they were nothing more than disposable tools. Still, it would be wasteful to throw them away entirely, so instead, ARC recycled them, injecting drugs to control their minds. As he spoke, the poor captive remembered undergoing the exact same treatment. He cried out that whether it was the government, the purists, or ARC, they were all the same, which is why, in his eyes, it was pointless to risk their lives for this so-called humanity. Tossing his weapon aside, Dmitri gave a bitter laugh, admitting he never had much love for ARC either. But unlike the others, he had a family to think about, so after the dragons were dealt with, he would wipe out anyone who dared to stand in his way. At that moment, he began unzipping his jacket as psychic energy flared and surrounded his entire body. Meanwhile, Lee's squad entered the shelter, and the purists noticed the Alpha Squad's signals had gone silent. At the same time, Easy Squad had reached Point A, while the protagonist and his team were heading toward Point B, where Delta Squad was located. The purist commander briefed his men on this and ordered them to handle it in their own way. Following his command, the purists loaded their weapons, promising their leader they would wipe out the intruders completely. On the other hand, Lee and his squad were taken aback to discover ARC had a hidden place like this that they had never been told about. At the same time, he wondered how the purists knew of this area when even ARC operatives had no clue it existed. This left only one conclusion: there had to be a spy among the inspectors. As they pushed forward, Lee caught sight of a faint glint of wire near his foot. He quickly told the squad to stop. It was clearly a trap. Crouching down, he examined it carefully. In that moment, he regretted that Kuro wasn't with them. Meanwhile, Easy Squad had finally arrived at Point A. When they opened the door, they were met with frightened children. The commander barked an order to seize them, but the men froze, unable to raise their guns against kids who hadn't harmed anyone. The commander goaded them, insisting mercy was weakness, warning that if these monsters weren't killed now, they would grow up and rule the world. One of the soldiers crouched down, gun raised, only to see the terrified faces of the children, trembling and crying. In that moment, he realized he wasn't killing enemies, he was about to murder children. He turned to the commander, trying to explain, but before he could finish, the poor man was shot dead on the spot. The commander showed no remorse, fully convinced that history would one day vindicate the necessity of their actions. Meanwhile, the sound of gunfire rang out, and blood splattered across Lee's face. Alarmed, he spun around and saw Nuth lying on the ground, his leg riddled with bullets. Simon and Lee dragged him back while Delta Squad continued their firefight. Leaving one soldier to tend Nuth, Simon and Lee pressed forward. They soon spotted enemies crouched behind tables. One of them was aiming a grenade launcher directly at their position. The sight made both Lee and Simon panic. There was no time for Simon to raise a shield. The moment the enemy fired, the protagonist reacted with telekinesis, knowing a barrier wouldn't save them in time. Raising his hand, Lee unleashed his psychic power. He seized the grenade mid-air and hurled it straight back toward the enemy. The move stunned them completely. They hadn't even imagined such a counter. The blast thundered through the area, and screams echoed all around. Once the smoke cleared, Lee, Simon, and the soldier who had stayed with Nuth pushed forward. Number 5 ETA-2S, laying down heavy fire with their machine guns until the threat was neutralized. Then Lee noticed a bracelet-style communicator on one of the fallen enemies. He picked it up and heard Easy Squad trying to reach Delta Squad. Through it, Easy Squad reported that they had cleared Shelter A and were now moving on to Shelter D. Hearing this, Lee's expression darkened. He realized they were already too late. Frozen in place, he stared down at the map where the central point glowed red. At the same time, Dmitri was locked in combat with the former 5th squad leader. The third year tossed him aside, slamming him to the ground. Then he struck Dmitri again, launching him into a wall with such force that the surface cracked. Still relentless, the former squad leader attacked again, this time striking Dmitri in the chest. Blood sprayed from Dmitri's mouth. As he lay unconscious, the former leader grabbed a steel rod. Channeling energy into it, he declared that some opponents could never be beaten, and it was time Dmitri accepted that truth. With that, he brought the steel rod down with full power. But it didn't harm Dmitri. In an instant, his body glowed with strange energy. He lifted his head, smirking as he declared he could never lose to a coward like that man. The rod meant to pierce his skull was now bending out of shape. Elsewhere, Nuth sat alone in a corridor. His mind drifted back to how he built a raft and survived on that island. He also remembered how he was accepted into Squad 13. Now, sitting there, disappointment filled him. He felt crushing guilt for failing to live up to even a single expectation of his squad. His comrades bandaged his wound, apologizing for leaving him here. They simply didn't have enough people left to assist with the evacuation. Over at the 4th Battle Simulation Dome, the Purists had arrived as well. They opened fire on the second years, forcing them to duck behind corners. The Purists lobbed the grenade into their position, but it failed to detonate effectively. One second year raised a telekinetic shield while another returned fire. Frustrated, the Purists hiding behind trees cursed at how ineffective their attacks were. They questioned the status of their air support as their time was running out. They knew ARC reinforcements might arrive any moment, and their frontline troops would be obliterated. They bitterly regretted not bringing a bomb. If they had, this fight would have ended in one strike. Meanwhile, the second years found hope. This was exactly Lee's strategy. He had told them not to waste energy killing, but to stall until Allied forces arrived. On the other side, a member of Easy Squad was opening the door to Shelter D when the commander was alerted by his men. The ARC troops were approaching rapidly. That meant Delta Squad had been completely wiped out. The commander observed the fallen bodies. Though these were just kids, their developed forms and powers surpassed most adults. He wondered if those children had been shaken after witnessing what Delta Squad had done to the kids of Shelter A. At the same time, Lee was sprinting toward Shelter D with his squad. Glancing down at the communicator bracelet, he ordered his team to halt after spotting enemies ahead. They all froze before the corridor, realizing the enemy was waiting there. Watching their shallow breaths, Lee told them to listen closely to his plan. Meanwhile, an aircraft swooped over the base, firing and dropping explosives, causing massive blasts. Moments later, another unmanned bomber was detected, but ARC's air defenses managed to shoot it down as it approached the 4th Battle Simulation Dome. Back with Lee, he outlined his strategy to move through the ventilation shafts that connected straight into the room. If they could slip in before the enemy opened the door, they'd be able to strike from behind with ease. Simon raised concerns, pointing out that the thin vent plates might not withstand bullets, and even if the plan worked, injuries were almost guaranteed. Lee insisted there was no time for alternatives. Just then, Nuth showed up, joking that the plan he overheard halfway sounded like it needed his help. The others were stunned to see him moving despite his injury, but his wound had already healed somewhat thanks to his natural recovery. Simon couldn't help but praise Nuth's resilience. Soon after, they all crawled into the ventilation system. Nuth was surprised at how wide the shafts were. Lee explained that he and Simon would move in first, and when Nuth created a distraction, the rest would rush in to attack. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed. It was Nuth, already causing the diversion. The instant the squad leader notices movement above, he shouts out that there's a presence overhead. Gunfire erupts from the enemy, and Knuth rushes forward. At the same time, Lee tells his squad that it's time to move into action. Leaping from the corner, they charge at the Pure. The Purists, however, are distracted, their eyes locked on the ventilation pipe beginning to crack, seizing the moment as a chance. Lee drives his attack toward one of the Purists, but right then the commander notices and immediately targets Lee. Simon reacts quickly, putting up a shield to protect them and deflect the incoming fire. In that moment, bullets tear through the ventilation pipe, shattering it, and Nuth collapses to the ground with severe wounds. One commander yells that Nuth has to be taken out. At that same time, the door bursts open. The commander, along with the remaining unhurt Purists, steps inside the room. Taking cover behind the concrete, Lee insists that they can't let them advance. But then Nuth slowly rises to his feet, blood pouring from his body, and he demands from the Purists where exactly they think they're going. His injuries are terrifying, half his face practically gone. The Purists freeze, unnerved as if staring at a ghost, while both Lee and Simon are stunned. But Nuth activates his regeneration. His body begins healing as he taunts the Purists, asking if they've ever felt what it's like to be hurt so badly that you drag everyone down like dead weight. With a twisted grin, he calls his healing factor exhilarating, raising his gun toward them. Meanwhile, Kuro collapses to the floor. His foresight shows him that a bomber is dangerously close. Jose quickly grabs him, demanding to know what is happening. James and the others, along with Jose, look at Kuro with alarm as his eyes glow red and in his mind, he sees a plane releasing bombs over them. Rising to his feet, Kuro fixes his eyes on the sky. Fear spreads across his expression, yet he mutters a prayer of thanks that Lee isn't here with them, because his foresight warns him the bomb will drop right where he and the others are standing. Chaos explodes across the arena. Nobody knows whether this is truly an air raid. Panic breaks out, screams echo as everyone realizes those aren't just bombs, they're missiles streaking down from above. Akuro remembers how brutal things were back at Ark, but even then he refuses to return to that nightmare. Our protagonist's friend believes it's thanks to his closest companion, and he feels deeply grateful for everything Lee has done. He's simply relieved Lee isn't here, because someone like him shouldn't die in a place like this. Yet suddenly, a thought shakes him. If Lee were here, he would never give up. In that instant, Kuro snatches a stone from the air. Raising his hand skyward, he channels his ability, releasing waves of energy so intense they freeze the missiles mid-air. James can only gape in shock, unable to believe what he's seeing. Streams of energy twist and expand, spreading into a massive shape above. A colossal hand forms, stretching wide to seize the bombs, and with a flick it redirects them, sending the missiles plummeting harmlessly away. Wait. The explosions roar out, but high in the sky, leaving the ground untouched. Everyone shields their ears. Stunned, they had never imagined psychic power could transform on this scale. One man behind mutters that Ark's people are the real monsters, deciding he'll take at least one of them down. His hand darts into his jacket, pulling free a gun. He levels it at Kuro. Then a deafening gunshot rings out. Meanwhile, the group crowds around Nuth, desperate for him to wake. Lee keeps calling his name. Slowly, painfully, Nuth's eyes flicker open. Lee instantly asks if he remembers who they are, while Nuth's regeneration closes his wounds. He reassures Lee that he's fine, completely fine. Lee, though, scolds him, saying that while it all worked out, it was far too reckless, because without knowing his limits, Nuth is gambling his life. Hearing this, Nuth hesitates, asking if Lee is actually giving him a lecture. Lee brushes it off, telling him to forget it, and helps him stand, wondering aloud if they finally finish securing the first-year evacuation zone. Just then, word comes through about zones A and B, the gym, the 4th battle simulation dome, and the evacuation zone. Upon hearing it, Dimitri departs, carrying the former 5th squad leader over his shoulder. 3 days later, James finds Lee standing on the rooftop. With his men, James approaches him, asking if he's all right while puffing on a cigarette. Lee answers yes, though he admits he hasn't slept for 2 nights without medication. He adds that some of the others are still unstable, occasionally erupting in violent fits, because controlling their urge to kill humans is almost impossible. Lee recalls seeing countless first years dead, helpless, and remembers that not long ago he and his friends were just like them, humanists called psychers monsters. But to him, they looked more like terrified humans afraid psychers would dominate them someday. Ironically, this incident may create the very future they feared. Hearing this makes James uneasy. Sweat beads down his forehead, but when Lee firmly states he has no intention of becoming a monster, the tension eases. James nods in agreement, saying killing humans is not something they should ever get used to. Still, he admits he was terrified when he saw Kuro's display, unable to accept that they were only teenagers. Yet the one who frightens him most is Lee himself. At that moment, Lee thanks James for saving his friend's life. James explains that a traitor among the inspectors had drawn his gun on Kuro. He deliberately chose a day when capable students weren't present, which led to disaster. James says he took the bullet in Kuro's place and subdued the traitor himself. He also knows the higher-ups will tread carefully with Ark for now. He admits Lee may despise people like him who think about personal gain, but the truth is, what use is anything if they lose to dragons? They are all still human, mistakes are inevitable, and without dragons, these very weapons would have been turned on humans instead. So James insists he is working for the nation's future, just like everyone else. Before leaving, he tells Lee that even if he can't understand now, he will someday. But Lee replies that it's only an excuse, because if mistakes are made, they should never be repeated. James doesn't turn back, but he acknowledges it, admitting Lee genuinely terrifies him. The destruction and chaos hit Ark hard. Many first years died and those who survived dropped out. The second year stopped training and were placed into therapy. Meanwhile, Lee packed his belongings, the only one advancing to the 3rd year. There he encounters Silence, waiting for him. Silence stands face to face with Lee, leaving him puzzled. Lee wonders silently if something's wrong, but Silence is simply busy comparing his height against Lee, who is clearly taller. Still, Silence insists that he himself has grown taller. With that, Silence turns to leave, and even though Lee tells him to wait, he doesn't. At the 3rd year induction ceremony, Sector A8, Lee notices the label Psychic Force on the department, and it throws him off. But Johnny quickly explains that they no longer distinguish between 1st-gen Psychers and 2nd-gen 3rd years. They're all equally part of the Psychic Force. Extending his hand, Johnny introduces himself, eager to know who Lee is. Lee returns the handshake, introducing himself, but Johnny calls him Chan Lee. Even after correcting him, Johnny keeps repeating the wrong name, either not listening or simply not caring. Johnny then wishes him luck, spotting Silence waiting nearby. Immediately after, Silence escorts Lee to his new quarters. Seeing the room, Lee is taken aback by its size. It's twice as large as his old dorm. Typing out a quick note, Silence suggests Lee drop his things off since it's time for breakfast. At the cafeteria, Silence points out the wide variety of food available. No matter if he's Chinese or Japanese, he'll find something familiar. Lee corrects him, saying he's Korean, and admits it feels strange compared to second year, where strict rules applied. He even notices people casually taking food without lining up. Ignoring that, Silence reassures him that Korean food is definitely here. Lee himself never had many food options, so he doesn't mind. What does catch his eye is the mountain of sweets Silence piles onto his tray. Silence defends it, saying sugar is vital for psychers. Lee doesn't argue, digging into his own plate, focusing on the rice he picked. He's just about to take a bite with his chopsticks. When he notices Silence staring at him, confused, Lee asks what he's looking at. Silence explains that it's fascinating to see him use chopsticks. He says they're so precise, they could even catch a fly in midair. He saw it once in a movie where the hero did exactly that. Curious, Lee asks if Silence's mask also comes from a movie. Silence nods, saying it's modeled after the cyborg C3 from Terminal Chainsaw Massacre Machine, and Ark got it just for him. Poor Lee had asked half-jokingly, never expecting it really was movie-inspired. Later, as they walk down the, corridor, they bump into Laosha. She checks if Lee is the rookie who managed to pass this year. Right away, our MC salutes Corporal Laosha. That simple act leaves an impression, because Laosha notices how sharp and observant he is, recognizing rank even though Laosha isn't officially in the psychic force. Suddenly, Laosha asks the MC if he's really the same kid who blew up John's leg. The question makes Lee a little uneasy. But then Lacha burst into laughter, admitting he would have felt better if he had been the one to do it himself. He honestly expected Lee to be like a timid kitten, but since he clearly isn't, he invites him to the fitness center later in the afternoon. Lee immediately realizes that Lao Cha is challenging him to a duel, and this instantly reminds him of Dimitri back in Wei. Later that day, the two of them meet at the fitness center. Lao Cha is shirtless, standing in an aggressive stance, while our boy braces himself, warning Lao Cha not to complain later if he ends up getting hurt. Aocha only mocks him with a fake look of fear. In the next instant, the fight begins. Everyone watching at the fitness center starts cheering for Lee, which makes him doubt if he might actually lose. Just then, a punch comes flying his way. He barely dodges it, even though his head is spinning with thoughts. With a smirk, Laocha warns Lee to stay sharp. The protagonist tries to strike back at Laocha, but both of them keep dodging each other's attacks. Lee notices how Laocha's moves feel like they're straight out of a combat manual. Meanwhile, Laocha himself is impressed by Lee, realizing that his ability to dodge shows he doesn't just rely on his reinforced body. He's kept up with real training. Still, even enhanced bodies have weaknesses. Without a moment's hesitation, Laocha suddenly lands a punch right on Lee's face. Blood bursts from his nose, but Lee manages to stay on his feet. But then, another kick from Laocha slams into him, making his whole body tense. Lee knows clearly if he doesn't knock Laocha out, he doesn't stand a chance. Though instead of defending, Lee ducks down, grabs Laocha's leg, and tries to slam him to the ground. But Laocha just keeps grinning, fully aware this is the farthest the boy can go. Abruptly, Laocha swings his body and lands gracefully on the opposite side while tossing our poor hero straight into the wall. Lee hits the ground hard. Laocha glances at him with sharp eyes, clearly aware that if Lee wasn't enhanced, he'd be broken beyond repair. Catching his breath, Laocha turns back just to check if Lee's still alright. But blinded by anger, Lee tries to lash out with telekinesis, aiming reinforcement at Laocha. The psychic force shoots directly for Laocha's throat, but instead of flinching, he taunts Lee, asking if that's really all he's got. In that instant, the MC realizes what he's doing. He stops himself, bows his head, and apologizes. Surprisingly, Laocha commends him, pointing out that at least he recognized a critical weakness in reinforced bodies. A body like his is as solid as steel, but that also means it carries unbearable weight. He reminds Lee that he's good at changing up his attack patterns. If Lee had realized sooner that direct strikes wouldn't work, he might have tried trapping him instead, but that kind of wisdom only comes with experience. With that, Laocha leaves, telling Lee to show up at the same time tomorrow. Lee is left stunned, realizing he'll have to face him all over again. The next day, Laocha greets Lee once more. He motions for Lee to look, showing Johnny Schwartz sparring with another fighter. Johnny is a first-generation psyker, blessed with the ability of physical reinforcement and renowned as the best in hand-to-hand combat. He's so powerful that he's endured 2 dragon control operations and even subdued a werewolf barehanded. Watching this, Laocha demands that Lee try to knock Johnny out. Taking a breath, Lee steps up to approach Johnny. Right away, Johnny recognizes him as the rookie, though he calls him Chan Lee. Annoyed, Lee corrects him. Still, Lee offers to spar without using psychic abilities. Johnny, being easygoing, agrees, and both of them take their positions. Once again, Johnny calls him by the wrong name, smirking as he tells him to get ready. Just as Lee tries to correct him again, Johnny lunges forward. In a blink, our boy is knocked flat on the ground by a single punch. Looking at Laucha, Johnny remarks that Lee isn't on his level yet, then extends a hand to help the MC up. Groaning, Lee sits up and insists on another round. Johnny looks a little puzzled but doesn't refuse. They spar again and again, but the outcome never changes. Later, after everyone else has left, Laucha and Lee remain alone in the training hall. Lee wears a frustrated frown after losing so many times, but Laucha reassures him, reminding him that hand-to-hand combat isn't his specialty, and it doesn't even need to be. His strength lies in weapons. After all, his goal isn't to put a dragon in a wrestling hold. This makes Lee think of Dimitri, who once joked he'd wrestle dragons with Sambo, and it makes him smirk. Still, Lee asks why Laucha wanted him to fight Johnny if bare-handed combat isn't essential for him. Laucha tells him to think carefully. What would he do if he were told once more to bring Johnny down? Obviously, he'd challenge Johnny with weapons. The lesson is clear. Lee must fight opponents using his own strengths. Just like that, Laucha has taught him something valuable. Meanwhile, most people still think of the protagonist as the weakest link. A few days later, the group goes to watch a movie and chat about it afterward. It's still early, so some of them suggest getting drinks. But Lee declines, heading into the hallway instead. There, he runs into Silence. Silence looks glad to see him, since he just got back from a 3-day mission. Curious, Silence types a question, asking why Lee is out so late. Lee explains that he just went to see a movie. The movie was Jungle Hunter Laucha. He admits he didn't want to learn anything about Laucha, but he also didn't want to miss out on watching it. Silence quietly types that he could have watched the movie with Lee if he really wanted to, but before sending it, Silence deletes the message, simply wishing him a good night before walking away. The speed at which he walks off reminds Lee of the very first time they met. Back then, he found Silence overwhelming and intimidating, but the way Silence sometimes scurries like a cat or acts clumsy makes him realize that deep down, he's just a kid. Sometime later, Lee asks for a rematch. This time, he and Johnny face each other with weapons in hand. Johnny looks noticeably more nervous now that weapons are involved. Still, the fight begins. Johnny charges straight at him, but Lee sidesteps and dodges. After 3 days of studying Johnny's fighting patterns, it almost feels like he's developed foresight. Now, no matter how many strikes Johnny throws, Lee blocks them all. He knows exactly what Johnny's next move will be, but instead of just defending, our hero launches into an aggressive offense. Still, as Lee closes in, Johnny blocks the strike with his bare hand. Then he immediately counters, aiming at Lee's throat. Even though Johnny blocked the hit, the force of Lee's spear strike shatters half of Johnny's sunglasses. With the attack stopped, Johnny technically wins. The match is so impressive that Johnny actually praises Lee and even says his name correctly this time. He then invites him out for food so he can introduce him to his friends. Laucha, watching from the side, also compliments Lee, because winning isn't the only thing that matters. Lee not only allowed Johnny to save face, but also used the chance to build trust. Smirking, Lee asks if Laucha means he doesn't need to prove himself by picking unnecessary fights, since Johnny clearly has a lot to offer too. Later on, Lee meets Octo while with Silence. He formally introduces himself now that Lee is officially a third year. Octo's real name is Siegfried Schumacher, chief engineer of Team 3. People call him Octo because his insanely fast hands make it seem like he has 8 limbs. After a while, Octo reviews Lee's abilities. His special traits and psychic levels only rank around C+ or B at best, but despite that, he's the first one to make it into PF with such stats. Lee's eyes widen in shock as he looks at the veteran who once stood as a star in the last war Psycho Frame. At first, Lee feels something is a little off, but the doctor explains that this is actually Oldman 3, a converted first-gen model, retired and refitted for training purposes, which means our boy has to put in daily practice to learn how to operate it. And so, Lee now finds himself wearing that very uniform. The doctor instructs him to stay completely still as screws are being fastened to ensure the suit locks seamlessly onto his body. This leaves him baffled. What if he needs to use the bathroom? But Octo reminds him sharply that such suits cannot be tailored for personal comfort. Once Lee is fully equipped, Octo will open the cylinder and connect him with the dragon parts. It will replicate the sensation he feels whenever he absorbs power from wielding a weapon forged from dragon parts. Today's mission is to measure the maximum duration of his Psycho Frame, and with that, the doors finally slide open. Their helicopter is en route to the psychic research facility located in southern Shanghai. That base is already crippled, having been struck by Ilu, which prompted China to request assistance. Only one Ilu remains there, but it is so formidable that it wiped out 2 entire platoons of special forces. She, this brown-haired man, not to be mistaken for a woman despite his name, believed they might need backup since this Ilu is capable of producing a psychic shield. But Johnny dismisses the worry, confident that they are no ordinary troops, and bringing down a shield will be nothing difficult for them. He then turns to Lee, asking him directly if he agrees. Lee only gives a curt, dry response. Johnny presses him to say more, but Lee refuses to humor him, frustrated because Johnny never addresses him by his proper name, even though he clearly knows it. This makes Harold and she burst into laughter. Yet beneath this banter, it is clear, this marks our protagonist's very first mission as a third-year student. The Elu stirs unpleasant memories for him, recalling how terribly things went before. So now, Lee waits anxiously to see what unfolds. The team soon arrives at the Psychic Research Center, but the place resembles nothing more than a wasteland. Still, it makes sense. These labs are highly classified, and if exposed, pure humanists would certainly launch an attack. This thought unsettles our boy, something even Johnny quickly notices. He gently pats the protagonist's shoulder, reassuring him that he will not be ordered to kill anyone again. That what happened earlier was simply tragic, and Ark had no other choice. To ease the tension, Johnny once again intentionally calls him by the wrong name, which only annoys Lee further. At that very moment, the officials in charge arrive in their vehicles. The researchers greet Ark, and behind them, the Lee Spot soldiers stand tall. Chinese soldiers then raise their hands in salute. Ark's members return the salute out of respect. Johnny signals Lee and Harold to stay on standby. While waiting, one of the researchers dares to pat our boy on the shoulder, asking if he is the Ark's child soldier. Lee immediately seizes the man's wrist and twists it, warning him never to touch him again. The researcher screams in pain and hastily agrees. With that, the researcher retreats, muttering about Lee's fiery temper while throwing strange glances his way. Soon after, everyone steps into the elevator that leads to the first floor, the only accessible path, since the rest are sealed off. The facility consists of 3 levels in total. Their 2 main objectives are clear: retrieve the research data and locate any survivors. Any enemy encounter must be ignored unless absolutely necessary. Lee, curious, wonders what kind of research was being conducted here, but Johnny admits he has no idea, as everything was kept extremely secretive. After all, even their own soldiers died here for reasons still unknown. Still, Johnny tells Lee not to seek revenge if the 3 of them fall today during a retreat, because our hero and the second genes are far too valuable to be lost. Lee smirks at that, remarking that if he were to die on such an easy mission, then it's better he dies sooner rather than later. They finally reach the first floor, but the place is completely empty, so they press on to the second floor. Lee senses something is off. Suddenly, the stench of blood wafts from the second floor. Yet curiously, there are no signs of combat from the first floor up to the emergency exit of the second. Lee suggests this might not have been an external attack. Johnny realizes he has been suspicious as well, especially since the third floor is the only one without direct elevator access. This implies something critical is being stored there under perfect conditions. Believing the researchers misled them, they decide to withdraw. But at that very moment, the power is cut. The soldiers are instantly thrown into confusion. It feels almost as if someone had been monitoring their conversation, cutting the power the moment Ark spoke of retreat. That's when our protagonist remembers the researcher patting his shoulder. Reaching for it now, realization dawns. They had been bugged. With no real choice left, they are forced to move forward. Their radios go silent as well, leaving them with only one option: find the emergency power system and activate it manually to escape. Opening the door to the second floor, they are confronted by a horrific sight: corpses dangling lifelessly, eyes shut tight. The soldiers' eyes widen in shock, horror, and disgust. Meanwhile, our boy stands paralyzed, utterly frozen and unresponsive. Through a tense silence, the atmosphere finally eases slightly. Lee lowers his head, apologizing to everyone. Harold and the others understand. None of them have ever witnessed such horror before. Johnny, however, is impressed that Lee didn't faint, considering he is the same age as Harold's younger brother. Curious, Lee asks about him, revealing that he himself also has younger siblings. Harold explains that he once had 2 siblings, but his entire family was wiped out in a minion attack. Young Harold had cried bitterly and fought desperately, convinced he had no chance but still wishing only to die. Yet fate had other plans, for death never comes simply by wishing. He fought back with all he had, eventually becoming a soldier, walking into battles prepared for death. But instead of dying, he was praised for his courage, as though fate itself was mocking him. Hearing Harold's story deepens our boy's respect for him. Lee cannot even imagine losing his own siblings. Just then, Johnny checks if Lee is alright, announcing the second floor is clear. They prepare to move on to the third. Doors to the third floor are automatic, and something about them feels suspicious. But with the power down, they remain sealed shut. Lee activates his physical reinforcement traits. His entire body ignites with energy. With that force, he pries the doors open, revealing a creature wielding a weapon. Confusion sweeps across the team. They wonder if this figure is a survivor or one of their soldiers. But the moment it raises its weapon at Johnny and fires, the truth becomes undeniable. It is Elu. In an instant, gunfire erupts. The 3 others manage to take cover while Johnny absorbs the barrage with his abilities. Seizing the moment, he uses his traits to counter. Soon, the wild creature's gun clicks empty. Johnny charges forward, but to their shock, the Elu had prepared a grenade all along. Smirking, it hurls the grenade straight at Johnny and vanishes. The squad is stunned. Never before have they seen an Elu wield human weapons. More disturbingly, it not only used those weapons but also tricked them, isolating a member in order to strike as if it fought like a human. At first, Johnny had wanted to find the emergency room, but now he is determined to uncover the truth behind this facility. One thing is certain, the Elu won't launch another gun attack now that it knows bullets are useless. But where did it disappear to? Elsewhere, that same Elu prowls the shadowy corners, wandering through the second-floor corridors lined with hanging corpses. The creature is furious, its weapons failing to harm the humans. Yet an overwhelming hunger to grow stronger and tear them apart consumes it. It begins absorbing strange energy from the corpses, the gathered force concentrating at the center of its head. With each surge of energy, it laughs louder, drunk on its newfound strength. At last, the emergency power flickers back on. The team removes their night vision gear. Johnny, being Johnny, simply whips out a pair of sunglasses and slips them on, leaving our boy stunned at his nonchalance. With the lights restored, they press forward, only to realize this facility isn't even on any official map. The truth begins to dawn. They are about to uncover what was hidden here. The pieces fit together. The so-called rescue and retrieve mission was nothing but a fabrication, a trap laid out to lure them in. In truth, the lab's real purpose was to harvest genuine data after Ark engaged with the Elu. It even seems that the Elu had been captured alive and had been trained by the researchers, conditioned to be released as a weapon in future wars. At last, they reached the testing chamber only to find the researchers sprawled dead across the floor. The testing capsule lay in ruins. It was clear now, the researchers had tried to experiment on Elu, attempting to alter it, but the beast proved far too strong, ultimately breaking free. Every nation within the RCS project is obligated to report psychic research to the Supreme Council, but Johnny points out that the rule is mostly ceremonial. Other nations secretly do the same and just haven't been caught. To Lee, this revelation is sickening, another conflict caused by human greed. Johnny already knows the higher-ups won't let them leave alive. He does manage to pull files from the computer, but the documents are in Chinese, leaving him irritated. Still, he decides to copy them anyway. Suddenly, our boy shouts. An enemy stands before them. Both she and Lee immediately move in, covering Harold and Johnny as they fire at Elu. But no matter how many bullets rain down, Elu remains untouched, its psychic shield protecting it. Running out of options, Lee considers using a spear to pierce the shield, but Johnny cuts him off, telling the MC to step aside. He has already activated his special reinforcement ability, Callies, amassed a Taken Dak H's. Without delay, Johnny charges forward, sword in hand. In a flash, he slices through Elu, cutting it cleanly in two. But the moment the blade connects, the creature turns transparent. Tension floods the room. None of them can believe what just happened. In the blink of an eye, Elu reappears behind Harold, pressing a dagger against his throat. Panic streaks across the protagonist's face. Harold tells him to attack, gripping the dagger with his bare hand as blood spills everywhere. Lee stands frozen, overwhelmed. He knows attacking is the only option, but terror roots him to the spot. His mind flashes with the image of Elu killing Harold. The hallucination shifts. Now he sees his best friend falling victim to Elu instead. That's when she suddenly opens fire. A bullet tears straight through Elu's head, forcing it to release Harold. Johnny bolts forward, yelling at Lee to focus, and the end. At that instant, our boy snaps out of his delusion, but it's too late. Elu has already slipped away. Still, he catches sight of something, a psychic crystal lodged inside its skull. The earlier flames had left a hole, exposing the crystal clearly. Johnny rushes to Harold's side, finding him in terrible condition. His chances of survival look non-existent. Johnny's anger flares, while our protagonist declares they must track Elu down and finish it immediately. Narrowing his eyes, Johnny asks if this is about revenge. But Lee explains this isn't vengeance. Elu is wounded and its psychic energy is nearly drained. This is their best chance. Johnny accepts his reasoning and agrees to the hunt. The three move cautiously down a deserted corridor. While they walk, Johnny questions Lee about what he noticed earlier. Lee explains that Elu cannot use Blink consecutively, nor can it use Blink and the psychic shield at the same time. That's why it used Harold as a living shield, and the tactic had worked. But in the process, it was also injured. That vulnerability is their only opening. With this in mind, they choose to split up. But before parting ways, Johnny warns them, one of them will definitely run into Elu, so above all, don't die. Then they scatter. Lee steps into a corridor littered with corpses. His body trembles, but he forces himself to calm down and pushes forward. Unbeknownst to him, one of the corpses slowly opens its bloodshot eyes behind him. It isn't a corpse at all. It's Elu, disguised among the dead. As Lee moves deeper, he senses a presence creeping up from behind. To him, this grotesque display doesn't feel like intimidation. The hanging bodies are fueling the crystal, the same way the mage Elu once did, restoring psychic reserves. That psychic energy feeds on hatred. Hatred of humans who cause their suffering. Hatred that powers their killing instinct. Even without seeing the dagger in its hand, Lee feels Elu's presence pressing down on him. Elu lashes out, but Lee reacts instantly. He ducks, rolling across the blood-slick floor. From his crouched position, he raises his weapon and fires without hesitation. Elu screeches, trying to turn away. But Lee knows hesitation is death. He must kill. He unleashes a furious assault, striking again and again, finally channeling his telekinesis to pierce the creature straight through. Yet even as he attacks, Elu begins to blink away, just like before. Lee clenches his teeth, refusing to let it escape this time. He hurls his weapon with all his strength, striking Elu the very moment it vanishes. Breathing heavily, the MC inspects a motionless body lying on the ground. Later, she zips Harold's body inside a bag. Rage twists within the MC. These people never deserve to die. But Johnny explains coldly, they could have survived had the higher-ups done their job. But those in power don't care. They command thousands of lives. Why would they care if a few lived or died? Eventually, they stop caring altogether. That is humanity's cruel truth. The first loss cuts deep, but soon enough, people grow numb. Before leaving, Johnny warns Lee if he ever feels himself growing numb to death, he must remember, every life holds value. But Lee assures him he has not forgotten anyone who has fallen before him, and he never will. By then, the sun is already setting. Together, she and Lee carry Harold's body outside. Johnny follows behind, holding a massive metal plate. It's when they see researchers and armed soldiers blocking their path. She steps forward, volunteering to negotiate. Confident they won't shoot an unarmed man in front of witnesses, she demands the soldiers listen. In that moment, recognition spreads. The soldiers realize it is June. He exposes the truth. The research center has been deceiving them. Not only have they been cradle monsters unethically, but they've concealed it from their own people, leading to countless deaths. A researcher orders the troops to fire, but the Chinese commander ignores him, turning instead to hear June out. June appeals to the soldiers, reminding them they are not slaves. They wield their weapons by choice, so they must question whether their orders are right. The soldiers realize they thought this mission absurd from the very start. Why kill ARC survivors? June raises his voice, declaring that soldiers are the true strength of a nation, and with that strength, they have the right to reject orders that defy reason. Inspired, the soldiers raise their weapons, not at ARC, but at the researchers. The commander had expected this outcome. After all, June was revered as China's national hero, his deeds in the First War legendary. Many of these men grew up idolizing him. One researcher, desperate, seizes the commander's uniform and threatens him, promising to kill his family unless he shoots ARC's men. But that is the commander's breaking point. He shoots the researcher in the head on the spot. Moving forward, the Chinese soldiers salute the ARC soldiers. June asks the commander if he's certain about this choice. The commander affirms without hesitation, if punishment comes, it will fall on the research center. Soon, the truth about this facility will surface, and higher authorities will have no choice but to scapegoat the researchers. The commander remarks that the worst punishment would be losing a promotion, a small price compared to what the ARC men sacrificed. Soon after, the helicopter lifts into the sky. Ronnie and June glance over only to find the MC asleep. It's the first time they've ever seen him doze off. Though June understands, he's endured more than anyone. At dawn, gunfire cracks into the air in a ceremonial salute. A helmet and machine gun rest atop a tombstone as soldiers bow their heads. Together, they honor the fallen. Later, walking side by side, our boy admits how terrified he was when June began negotiations. He confesses that if not for her reputation as a hero, the soldiers would have shot without hesitation. June counters, saying that soldiers like Harold and Laucha are the true heroes back home. But he clarifies that he isn't like them. Many of his own feats were exaggerated, used as propaganda to inspire enlistment. Just then, Johnny arrives. He tells June not to diminish himself, insisting he has every right to the title of hero. Then Johnny turns to our boy, ordering him to come along, explaining that he is being summoned elsewhere. They arrive inside an extravagant office. Johnny tells Lee to wait there since someone will show up soon, then walks out. In the office, a large screen is displaying the ongoing second-year matches. At the moment, Squad 13 is facing off against Simon's group, with Jose and Nuth going all out on the offensive. Jose activates his ignition skill, surrounding the battlefield in flames, but fire proves useless against Simon, who shields himself through telekinesis, forming a barrier. Worse yet, the ignition rebounds on Jose himself, and they end up suffering a crushing defeat. Right then, Lee notices that Kuro is nowhere to be seen, and panic sweeps over him. Almost immediately, Alexander Lacour enters the room, explaining that Lee was summoned here because of his partner, Kuro. Lee salutes Alexander, learning that this man is the second in command, holding the real authority within ARC. Afterward, they sit together sharing tea while they talk. Alexander wrestles with whether Lee's partner should be deemed incapacitated. Meanwhile, Lee can't help thinking about how grim this whole situation is. But then Alexander looks straight at him, declaring that Lee is the only one who has ever managed to bring Kuro back. After the attack from the pure humanists, Kuro reached S-Class, but ever since, something has been eating away at him. Racked with guilt for using his powers to kill, he now refuses to train at all, though the commanding officer asks Lee to persuade him to train again, stressing that they can't afford to lose an A-level psyker over this. When Lee finally steps into Kuro's room, he is horrified by the sight of Kuro, looking utterly drained. Still, Lee sits with him and insists it wasn't his fault, that he shouldn't shoulder all the blame, but His partner admits he wasn't in control and suspects that deep down he may have truly wanted those people dead. Lee reminds him that even if it was true, he did it to protect his friend, and that meant he had done the right thing. But Kuro only apologizes. He declares that this is the end of the line for him. Looking at Kuro, Lee reflects on how kind he has always been, unlike Lee, who never had the luxury of pity toward his enemies. Kuro had only held on this long with the hope of someday being in the same league as Lee. But Lee has already watched too many die, and he cannot stand to see another friend fall, so he tells Kuro to quit. Kuro is stunned, never expecting his own friend to encourage him to walk away. Lee makes it clear again that Kuro is not cut out for battle, and it is perfectly fine for him to stop now. Hearing this, Kuro's face darkens, his mind riddled with doubts. Lee explains further, if Kuro were surrounded by a crowd and in danger, Lee would kill everyone around without hesitation just to keep him alive. But in contrast, Lee points out, Kuro likely could never do the same. So Lee urges him to give up being a soldier, telling him his gifts could serve a far greater purpose elsewhere. The other boys, eavesdropping on the conversation, start wondering why Lee is encouraging his friend to give up. One of them even suggests dragging the crybaby out immediately. But as soon as a student reaches for the door, Lee slams it shut with his telekinesis, barring anyone from entering. The boys hammer on the door, demanding to be let inside, but Lee commands them to stay quiet, stating firmly that this conversation is too important. The boys shout back, threatening to break in. Lee turns back to Kuro, admitting that at first he really had thought about persuading him in the same way as the others. But now, seeing how this is unfolding, he insists that even if they somehow survive the war, Kuro will only spend the rest of his life drowning in suffering. Shaken, Kuro warns Lee that he'll be punished for this, but Lee doubts it, since as a combat-ready psyker, he'll likely just get off with a warning. At that moment, the door bursts open. Soldiers seize Lee and slam him to the floor, twisting his arm. Seeing this, Kuro freezes, trembling in both horror and rage. His emotions spiral, and he cries out for them not to harm his one and only friend. Grinding his teeth, Kuro screams at the soldiers to stop and, in an instant, radiant telekinesis engulfs the room. With a single strike, the soldiers' heads are severed. Later, Lee stretches his arms to ease the pain. Walking down the corridor, he crosses paths with Alexander. Smiling, Alexander comments on how Lee nearly fooled him and could have at least given him a warning. Lee's mind replays the scene from moments ago. He remembers the soldiers' heads sliced clean off by telekinesis. The soldiers have been paralyzed with terror. And at that point, Lee realizes it had all been an illusion, a projection of fear. Even so, Kuro had remained capable of slaughtering everyone in the room. But then Kuro calmed himself, announcing that Lee had convinced him he would submit to containment training, and afterward proceed to the third year. Thus, Lee was to be uncuffed. Kuro, gazing at him, realizes how helpless Lee had been, cuffed only because of him. His best friend had always been his shield, always protecting him, but now it was time for him to stand shoulder to shoulder with his friend. After this, Lee leaves, and Alexander finally understands why everyone calls Lee so intense though. He also worries that such intensity could prove dangerous. During a training session with Laocha, poor Lee is bombarded with so many attacks that he can barely defend himself. Later, in training with Johnny, the same pattern repeats. He's slammed hard into the ground. Afterward, Laocha and Johnny bid farewell, chuckling as they walk off, while Silence hides his laughter. Walking afterward, Lee is literally limping. He hadn't realized those hulks were so eager to throw him around. Silence types something out, still not grasping why Lee even needs to learn martial arts. Lee explains, it's simply about covering all bases, preparing for any possible scenario. Silence glances at him, remembering Johnny's advice for Lee to calm down. He had seen it earlier. It wasn't every day the calm, collected guy was completely flustered. Yet right now, he sees Lee barely able to walk, clutching his back and hobbling forward. He looks like he won't even make it. Silence offers him a piggyback ride, but instead of gratitude, Lee snaps at him to keep quiet. In the next training session, John finally returns, bursting into the gym with his new prosthetic leg. All the instructors turn toward him, as do Lee in silence. Smirks spread across the group while Lee stands there stunned. Johnny cracks a joke, praising the trainer for his impressive kicks, and John laughs, offering a playful kick of his own. Concerned, Lee asks if John is resuming duty already, but the sergeant explains he'll be training first years again for a while, along with recruiting second years, and still needs more rehab. He adds that Lee has already completed his first mission as a third year. Lee looks proud, but John thinks otherwise. Later, they step outside together, the senior lighting up a cigar as always. He brushes off the smoking restrictions, but John reminds Lee it's prohibited anywhere inside ARC. John mentions he brings it up at every meeting, but the higher-ups never act on it. Changing the subject, Lee asks whether John remembers the Elu mage he captured. Hearing this, Lee immediately presses to know if anything came out of the investigation. John's expression hardens as he reveals that the Elu mage said the war would not start in 3 years. He explains that while the main forces will strike in 3 years, the vanguard is already prepared to move. Hearing this, Lee feels as though the ground has dropped out from beneath him. John clarifies that the prophecy of a 10-year launch wasn't false, but with the vanguard, war will come much sooner. Later, Johnny knocks on Lee's door. Lee opens it. He looks a bit wary, but Johnny hands him a flash drive. It contains the second-year matches from yesterday. Johnny confirms Squad 13 was there, the same squad Lee once led. Then he asks why Lee is holed up in his room on the weekend, assuming maybe he doesn't find Johnny and the others entertaining. Frowning, Lee mutters that those guys only talk dirty, and he never knew there were so many ways to describe women. Laughing, Johnny tells him it's just the downside of being surrounded by men, though Lee only finds it embarrassing. With that, Johnny leaves, hoping Lee enjoys the match. Later, Lee sits down in front of the TV and begins watching. His squad is matched against Squad 3 once more, likely because half of the second years were wiped out during the attack. But Lee is stunned when he sees that Gijo has now taken over as squad leader. This makes our boy smirk, knowing Gijo is clever, though he can be a real jerk at times. Protagonist keeps his eyes on the entire match. He's amazed to see Simon so furious that he grabs Gijo by the collar after Squad 13 secures the win. Lee finds it almost unbelievable that Gijo managed to run circles around Simon until sunset. Afterward, Lee lies back on his bed, aware that some second years will soon advance to third year, wondering which ones it might be. It's in this moment that he realizes maybe he's feeling lonely now. During the competition, Gijo boldly declares that he will take on Simon himself, but that's when Jose and Nuth trade uneasy glances. After all, the last time Gijo said this, he told them to kill him if he actually tried to fight Simon. Embarrassed, Gijo quickly tries to clarify, explaining that the reason he said that was because their plan back then was to charge the enemy head-on, and going directly against Simon is like being rats facing a lion. This time, Gijo instructs them not to confront Simon directly, pointing out that Simon's weakness lies in his lack of teamwork. Instead, they will only pretend to go head-to-head with him. That way, Jose and Nuth can handle the rest while Gijo keeps Simon distracted. The match begins, and the objective is to capture the flag. As soon as the battle starts, Gijo, keeping a safe distance from Simon, taunts him to come closer. But being smart, Simon ignores his rival and starts running in the opposite direction. Gijo realizes he'll need to outthink him, so he provokes him by boasting that Lee is far better in combat than Simon. He adds that Kuro surpasses him completely in psychic abilities. He even claims that the protagonist has gotten taller, already outgrowing Simon, and then he declares that he himself is taller than Simon too. At that, Simon suddenly stops. Gijo thinks his ploy has failed. He's about to walk away, but it turns out his taunts worked. Simon snaps, unleashing a telekinetic strike. Stones hurl toward Gijo, and the poor guy panics at the sudden assault. In the end, this becomes the longest match in ARC history. 7 years earlier, John is tailing a man, but as soon as the man notices he's being followed, he warns John to stop trailing him though. John refuses, since it's his mission to bring this man back to ARC. The man admits he knows all about them, but he wants nothing to do with psyker institutions, especially ones that train children to become killers. He recalls being handed over to the organization by his father, a devoted believer in a wartime cult known as Peaceful. Raised as a mercenary, he endured brutal daily training. At first, he was forced to hunt small animals. Soon after, he was ordered to kill dogs, pigs, monkeys, and cows. Before long, he could kill humans without the slightest trace of guilt. For that reason, he refuses to let John drag him back, not wanting other children to suffer as he once did. He suggests John walk away. Still, John steps closer, explaining that if they lose the coming war, humanity itself will be wiped out. He promises not to order him to kill, only to serve as an instructor. But the man reminds John that none of this has anything to do with him, yet the trainer knows this won't end easily, because if the man keeps refusing, John will have to force him. The man isn't afraid, warning him to go ahead, but to remember he may die if he tries. In an instant, John lunges forward, striking at the man, but the man evades as though he had predicted the attack. Gritting his teeth, he glares at John and pulls out a knife. John manages to seize it, swinging toward the man, but the man is strong enough to block it barehanded. Wrenching the knife into his own grasp, the man slashes it back at John. John just barely steps away in time, avoiding the blow. It was dangerously close, he could have died right there. The man tells him again to leave. Instead of listening, John smashes a fist into his nose, making blood gush out. The burly fighter smirks, mocking him for missing, saying he couldn't kill John, so now the fight must continue. With that, he charges again, but this time the man tries to trap him in a lock. He slams the sergeant down onto the ground. John's body trembles against the floor, and the man tells him he'll never win. If he wants to end it, he should grab the knife lying behind him on the ground. John taunts him, mocking the pride he takes in martial arts. The man shifts into his combat stance, prepared to unleash his martial arts techniques against Sergeant Red. The way he positions himself makes John realize those hands look deadlier than any knife. Both men charge straight at one another. The man lands a punch on John, leaving a deep scar, but John retaliates, punching back with his fire ability, choking him with embers lit from his cigar. Later, both lie sprawled on the floor, looking half dead until Johnny arrives, asking whether John killed the guy, got killed himself, or if they both dropped dead together. At that moment, John sits upright, shoving the man toward Johnny and explaining he just passed out. He admits it was pathetic to rely on his cigar like that, but Otto had given him a crystal that amplified psychic powers, and that's how he controlled the embers. With the mission done, Johnny files his report to the higher-ups. Out of curiosity, he tries guessing whether this man could have been Lee.